We are in an emergency.
On the night of the 24th of August 2001, a fully loaded Airbus A330 with 306 people on board ran out of fuel midway over the Atlantic. How could a state-of-the-art computerized airliner suffer such a catastrophic failure?
Mayday, mayday, mayday. We have lost both engines due to fuel starvation. We are gliding now. Well, we're now at 30,000 feet at the rate of descent of 2,000 feet per minute.
We have to ditch in the water.
I need you to put on your life jackets right now.
This film investigates what happened to Air Transat Flight 236.
This is it. It's over. You're just gonna die in the next 5 to 10 minutes.
And the speed's increasing, 203 knots now. It's way too fast.
Everybody, I need you to brace. Oh my God!
August 23, 2001. Toronto International Airport is busy. Air Transat is a charter company that has grown rapidly to become one of the largest airlines in Canada. Midsummer brings fewer business travelers and a holiday atmosphere. Air Transat Flight 236 is bound for Lisbon. Most of the passengers are Canadians visiting Europe or Portuguese immigrants heading home. The plane, a twin-engined Airbus A330, is being flown by a young co-pilot, Dirk de Jager, and an experienced captain, Robert Pichet.
Captain Robert Pichet is somewhat out of the ordinary. Captain Pichet, from the moment he gets his wing, he gets to learn how to fly in the north of the province of Quebec, where the conditions occasionally are very severe.
The flight deck of the A330 is ultra-modern. Banks of computers connected to over 100 onboard sensors constantly monitor the operation of the plane. This film reveals how serious problems can arise when the pilots begin to distrust the computers. Before departure, the computers give no indications of any problems with the Airbus.
236 Heavy, follow A320 Air Canada. Turn left on Romeo and hold short on 24 right.
Roger, follow A320 Air Canada, left on Romeo, and hold short of 24 right.
With the crew of 7, Flight 236 has 306 people on board.
No, we were married for 4 days, wasn't it?
4 days.
4 days.
4 days. So we had planned to go to Portugal for our honeymoon, and we had booked this flight on Air Transat. And rather quickly, because we hadn't really planned what we were going to do very carefully. So this was the last flight left.
Well, boarded on this flight to go on a 2.5-week vacation with a friend of mine. Obviously, I was very excited, spending 2.5 weeks on the coast of Portugal. A very excited feeling.
Transat 236 Heavy, cleared for takeoff.
240 at 8, cleared for takeoff, 24 right, Transat 236 Heavy.
At 20 minutes past 8, the Airbus A330, loaded with over 47 tons of fuel, leaves Toronto for Lisbon.
V1, rotate.
The weather forecast for the Atlantic crossing is good. Everything runs smoothly on the flight deck, apart from a small adjustment to the route. To avoid congestion, air traffic control directs the flight 60 miles south of its original route. It's a minor alteration, but will later play a crucial role. the passengers settle down for the long crossing.
The reason for our trip to Portugal was a family trip. We were going to a wedding. Otherwise, we would not have gone this year. So instead of just going for 4 days for a wedding, we decided to stay for 2 weeks and throw the wedding in as a kind of family perk and see everybody.
Everything appeared quite normal, and in fact, I had traveled on Air Transat previously and found it not to be very good, and was surprised by the quality of the flight, that it was on time, the plane was newer, and we thought generally it was much better than we had expected it would be.
We're getting to our next checkpoint.
Every 30 minutes across the Atlantic, the crew check their position and fuel consumption against their flight plan.
0.2 tons on the right, 11.2 tons on the left.
Despite the computerized systems, some procedures, like checking the fuel on board, still need to be done by hand.
5.2 tons.
By comparing the amount of fuel in the tanks with the amount the flight started with, the pilots can keep an eye on the fuel consumption.
Fuel check complete. Levels normal for the distance flown.
All right.
For the first 5 hours, everything is routine. The flight crew, Air Transat, and the accident investigators have all declined to be interviewed about what happened next. This film uses known facts about the flight, standard emergency procedures, and expert opinion to reconstruct what took place on Flight 236.
Look, we're getting a warning signal. Oil temp low and oil pressure high on number 2. What?
This warning is the first step in the crisis.
Oil pressure is within normal limits on number 1. And number 2 is slightly high.
The computer display reveals that the oil temperature is low in engine number 2, but the oil pressure is high. It is a very unusual reading. The pilots are puzzled.
I can't see anything here. I'll look in the FCOM.
Okay.
A low oil temperature indication is normally indicative of bad readings, bad sensor. Oil temperatures don't decrease normally, they increase. A low oil temperature would be of no concern. The high oil pressure is a very strange indication. It's very rare. In fact, I've never actually heard of one. It's only indicative of the contamination normally of the oil with fuel. That's not something that's explained in the manuals.
Call the company.
The crew contact Air Transat's maintenance group in Montreal.
Transat 236 to Mirabel Operations.
Mirabel Transat 236. Hi.
Hi, we have a little problem. We're getting the warning oil temp low and oil pressure high on the ECAM for engine number 2. There's nothing in the QRH nor the FCOM. Can you help us out?
I'm looking in the manual.
The ground crew have no immediate solution. The pilots must work it out for themselves.
They may have been given some advice on troubleshooting to see if that would help. But ultimately, the pilots are up there on their own. They can get advice from somebody 2,500 miles away, but they can't really fix their problems.
Suggest you keep monitoring your oil levels and see what happens. Advise us on
But because the oil readings are so unusual, the pilots believe they may indicate a computer error. The crew keep monitoring the oil levels. Air Transat 236 continues on track. Then, 20 minutes later, a new warning.
Fuel imbalance warning. Haven't seen that before. Follow all ECAM action. I have air traffic control.
In the Airbus A330, most of the fuel is in large tanks in the wings. The computer has now detected that the fuel level on the right is significantly lower than the left. The crew consult the Airbus flight manual, which recommends they transfer fuel through a special cross-feed valve. Fuel will then flow from one tank to the other. But before opening the crossfeed, the pilots must be sure that the imbalance is not caused by a more serious problem, such as a fuel leak.
Last fuel check was only 15 minutes ago and it was okay. No indication of a fuel leak. Keep going.
Wing crossfeed. On.
On.
Once you begin a cross-feeding procedure to correct a fuel imbalance, restorative action should commence quite quickly. In other words, the situation would not continue to get worse. It would either stabilize immediately and then begin to correct itself.
But the situation is not correcting itself. Unknown to the pilots, there is a major fuel leak in the number 2 engine on the right-hand side of the plane. Flight 236 is in mid-Atlantic, nearly 300 kilometers from the nearest land. "39,000 feet over the Atlantic, nearly 300 kilometers from land, Air Transat Flight 236 is in trouble. Unknown to the pilots, the right engine is leaking fuel. The plane's computer system has thrown up a series of warnings, but the pilots believe these are computer errors.
Have you ever seen something like this before?
No. Never. Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, even if there is a leak, it doesn't explain the alarms on the oil system.
And everything was okay at the last fuel check at 30 West. Oh. Bet you it's a computer problem.
The task of finding out if there is a fuel leak is made harder by the design of the Airbus systems.
The systems monitor hundreds and hundreds of sensors, and they can be affected by such mundane things as a little bit of frost or ice on a sensor can cause it to present bad data. So it's not something that would occur on every single flight, but it's something that we're quite used to dealing with.
There is no warning to show if the fuel level is falling faster than the engines are consuming it. So the pilots receive no immediate indication that there could be a fuel leak.
Fuel quantity isn't rising in the tanks for the right wing.
Check fuel quantity.
Looks very low. Hold on.
When co-pilot Diego carries out the fuel calculations, he discovers something is seriously wrong.
That's much less fuel than we should have. It looks like a fuel leak.
Check again.
Diego finds a disturbing difference.
According to all the gauges, all the tanks in the right wing are way below the level they should be according to the flight plan, and there's hardly anything in the other ones.
What about the trim tank?
There's nothing there either.
Yes?
Hello, first officer here.
Can you come to the cockpit, please?
Sure.
Although Captain Pichet believes he is dealing with a computer problem, he nevertheless decides to ask for a visual check, just in case, to see if there could be a fuel leak.
Captain?
Hi. Can you and Karen take some flashlights and go to the windows if you can see anything trailing back from the wings? It'll look like a mist or a stream, and report back immediately.
Okay.
Dirt, I want you to do another complete fuel check, please.
I'm so sorry.
In daylight, the fuel pouring out of the back of the wing would have been clearly visible. But in the dead of night, even with a torch, the fuel leaking from the engine is impossible to see.
The crew evidently realized that the situation was not improving. And at that point, they realized that their circumstances were becoming more serious. And I think that there were probably some discussions took place between the two pilots as to what their next course of action should be.
If the computer is correct, then with the amount of fuel remaining, the Airbus will no longer be able to make it to Lisbon. Captain Pichet is forced to make a crucial decision.
We've got a direct. Get on to Oceanic Control. Where's the nearest airfield?
Transat 236 Heavy, Santa Maria Control. Can you advise nearest airfield? We have a possible fuel problem.
The nearest runway is over 300 kilometers away. But with the fuel remaining, Leger's military airbase on the tiny island of Terceira in the Azores should be within reach.
Santa Maria Control, Transat 236 Heavy. Proceed 230 flight level 390 direct. 350 miles to threshold. Are you declaring an emergency?
Stand by, Santa Maria Control.
Not yet. It must be the computer.
Transat 236 Heavy, Santa Maria Control. No assistance required yet.
Flight 236 continues flying south for the next 25 minutes. Everything in the cabin seems normal. But in the cockpit, the fuel readings are getting worse.
Must be the computer.
I've checked. There's nothing in the trim or center tank. And the gauges show only 7.5.
According to the fuel gauges, the plane is using fuel much faster than normal. Whether they believe the gauges or not, the captain has no choice. He must warn air traffic control.
We have to declare a fuel emergency.
Transat 236 Heavy, Santa Maria Control.
Santa Maria Control, Transat 236 Heavy, go ahead.
Transat 236 Heavy, declaring fuel emergency.
I really hope it's a computer bug. Because if we land in the Azores with half a plane full of fuel, they'll crucify us.
But at 6:13 a.m., less than an hour from the first fuel alarm, the right-hand engine runs out of fuel and cuts out.
We're losing engine number 2. I don't believe this. Okay, maximum thrust on number 1.
What's going on? Miss, what's
The
happening?
lights started flickering on and off, which I thought was kind of odd, strange.
On one engine, the Airbus will not fly at 39,000 feet. They must descend quickly.
Try to transfer fuel from center tank and the trim tank.
Transferring. Fuel quantities reaching 0.
This can't be. We're not gonna go completely dry on this airplane. All right. We can't stay at 39,000 feet with just one engine. We'll descend to 33,000 to control our speed.
236 Delages Tower. We have lost one engine. Engine flame out.
Roger, Transat 236. We can see you on primary radar. You are at 135 nautical miles from Lajes Field.
We are 135 nautical miles from Lajes Field.
Well, there's a whole lot of critical things go on. In addition to that, you turn on all the exterior lights so people can see you're in trouble. You have to broadcast your intentions on an emergency frequency so that other people know that you're unable to maintain your altitude. You may be descending through their altitude, so everybody else is now on the lookout for an airplane that's in distress.
For the next 10 minutes, the stricken Airbus continues on its one remaining engine. The pilots still believe that the computer may be partly faulty and that they can make it to Leger's with fuel to spare.
At the end, might be all right.
Fuel gauge is falling fast, though. It's nearly hitting 0.
But 13 minutes after the right-hand engine cut out, and with 130 kilometers still to go, the left engine begins to fail.
We're losing number one.
Mayday, mayday, mayday. We have lost both engines due to fuel starvation. We are gliding now.
One of the most sophisticated airliners of the modern era, carrying 306 passengers and crew, is now nothing more than a giant glider, drifting steadily down towards the ocean.
Excuse me, can somebody come? Hello?
You can literally hear a pin drop. The exterior, there was no sound in that plane, in that cabin at all.
A lot of people were praying and screaming for God.
My wife was a little hysterical. My best friend was in another world.
The plane was dead silent, except for the people who were very upset.
List of functions we've lost. We have no more stabilizer. Blue and yellow hydraulic. No ADR 2 and 3. No anti-skid. No reversers. Rudder trim. Radio HF 1 and 2.
With the loss of both engines, we have no electrical system. If the engines aren't running, the generators aren't running. So there's no power on the airplane. There is a small device, it's called a ram air turbine. It will deploy from underneath the fuselage near the wing fairing. And it's a small propeller that deploys out the bottom of the fuselage and it spins in the wind. And that small propeller will provide very limited electrical and hydraulic systems to run the aircraft. In other words, although it's a glider, at least it's a controllable glider.
Calculate how far we can go with our glide angle, will you?
Well, we're now at 30,000 feet at the rate of descent of 2,000 feet per minute. We can hang on for 14 or 15 minutes.
What? I don't want to die on our honeymoon.
I was just trying to calm her down, like try and reassure her that everything would be okay.
It's a very big struggle to stay calm when you're considering your own death.
Without power, the plane loses 1,000 feet in height for every 5 kilometers it travels forward. They can reach the Azores, but if the pilots get their calculations wrong, they may face a forced landing on the water.
Not sure we can make it to Leges.
Air Transat Flight 236 is now drifting without fuel over the Atlantic. Although their initial calculations show that the plane should make it to Leges, Captain Pichet must now follow standard emergency procedure for a passenger jet over water.
Prepare the cabin.
The cabin's slowly depressurizing.
We need to put our oxygen masks on.
The loss of engine power means the cabin soon depressurizes.
Everybody, please, I need your attention. We're preparing to ditch the plane. I need you to put on your life jackets right now.
Within probably, I'd say, 2 minutes, I saw flight attendants with life jackets in their hand running down the aisles. And obviously, that was a sign of fear. What was happening was the first question that popped in my mind.
I just need to tie this up like that.
You don't really know what to think, but people did start to panic at that point when they were told to put on life jackets.
This isn't working. No, it's all right. Please keep her calm. It's not working.
My best friend was talking to his father. His father died 3 years ago. But he's talking to him because he thought for sure he was going to be joining him. And I just kept the same reiteration. Oh, it's okay, one hand on one leg, one hand on the other, both their arms clenched to mine, kind of looking at my in-laws, blinking. It's okay, it's nothing.
I kept thinking that if the plane did hit water, that we would survive. I was so convinced that we would survive no matter what happened to the plane that I was probably delusional.
Fear just suddenly just kicked in from my toes straight up to my head. At that point, they started instructing us and giving us instructions of what to do in this procedure. Take off your shoes was one of them. Don't inflate your life jacket until we hit the water. Get into this position when we hit the water. It was a lot of, it wasn't like ifs or maybes. It was, this was gonna happen, this is the real deal.
Ditching a large passenger jet on the water presents severe hazards. If the Airbus A330 has to make a forced landing, the chances of survival are bleak.
In my personal opinion, I don't think these airplanes would make very good boats. Typically, an airplane with a low mounted tail like this, as it enters the water, one of the first things that's going to hit the water is the tail, and it's probably going to be ripped right off, and the fuselage is probably going to open right about there.
In 1996, a Boeing 767 ran out of fuel off the coast of East Africa. Its last moments were caught on amateur video and reveal what happens when an airliner attempts a controlled landing on water. Of the 175 people on the Ethiopian Airways jet, only 50 survived.
The chances of it surviving a ditching and floating for very long are not very good.
If Air Transat Flight 236 has to carry out a similar maneuver, it faces an equally grave outcome. With over 100 kilometers before they reach the Azores, the pilots face a long and difficult maneuver. They need to keep the plane gliding for more than 50 minutes to reach the Azores.
There's very little time for any emotions at all. You're just so focused on the mission at hand. It's a life or death situation, of course, but you know, your intention is to get it there. You're not thinking about the alternatives, but you're fully focused on getting the airplane to its destination.
Transat 236 Heavy to Lajes Tower. Lajes Tower receiving Transat 236 Heavy.
Do you have us on radar, Transat 236?
We have you on primary radar. Confirm you're at 80 miles out. Your heading is good.
Transat 236 Heavy Lajes Tower, we are trying to make the runway. Please
describe runway heading and length. Lajes Tower Transat 236 Heavy. Runway is 33 and 10,865 feet long. Airport dead ahead on your present heading. Please advise when you have it in sight.
Transat 236 Heavy, we cannot see the airport. We will tell you when we can.
As the minutes tick by, the long wait for those on board is agonizing.
That's it. This is it. It's over. They're just gonna die in the next 5 to 10 minutes.
I had contemplated the idea that we would die, certainly. And kind of I think in that moment you can accept it more than you think you would accept it.
I never thought I was gonna die. I was in a little bit of a state of distress. I did my best not to show it, to try to keep the cool, calm, and collected, but there was certain times where I wasn't sure if we would make it.
The torture of the whole fact that you're gonna die, which I totally thought I was going to, is worse to me than dying. If I'm gonna die, just kill me now. Just get a gun and shoot me, or just let this plane go down and nosedive into the ocean and then just die instantly.
On the ground, emergency services prepare for the crash landing of a fully loaded airliner. With 20 kilometers to go, the crew now prepare for the most dangerous part of the operation, getting their plane on the runway in one piece.
6 Heavy to Lajes Tower. Do you have our distance from the threshold now and weather, please?
Roger, Transat 236 Heavy. You are 8 miles out according to primary radar. Airspeed 280 knots according to our readings. Visibility unlimited. You should have the airport in sight.
Negative, Lajes Tower. Until now, we cannot see the runway.
There is no room for error. Without power, the pilots have only one chance at landing. If they miss or overshoot the runway, the results could be catastrophic.
I got it. Just to the right. Minimum RAD speed is 140 knots. Maximum speed for gravity gear extension, 200 knots.
I'm not lowering the gear until the last minute, okay?
Okay.
The crew struggle to lose height and speed for landing.
Roger, Lajes. 6 nautical miles.
Let's open the slats. It'll slow us down a bit.
Slats out and locked.
As they approach the runway, their speed increases dangerously. Too fast and they could roll off the end of the runway.
Lower the gear.
Hold on. Speed is about 200. All right. I stabilize the speed. Can you give me a landing speed, please?
No engine, no flaps. Ideal approach speed is 170 knots. We're too fast.
Yes. But the runway is very long.
Captain Pichet now performs a difficult series of swerving maneuvers to slow the plane down for landing.
The plane was almost on a 45-degree angle. I thought it was just gonna flip over and just nosedive straight down.
The plane was circling around the island to slow down. So then we saw land and then we saw water. And when I saw water again, it really struck me that, our chance for survival had maybe was gone.
The runway is long. Yeah, sure, but at the end there's a 400-foot cliff. If we don't stop in enough time, we're toast. We're dead.
The crew line up the giant Airbus for final approach.
Landing gear down and locked. 3 green. No flaps. Only the emergency brakes. No spoilers, no reverse thrust. 4,000 feet, 195 knots. "3,000 feet, 197 knots. "2,000 feet, 200 knots.
Alert the cabin.
Cabin crew, 1 minute to landing.
Hang on.
Vertical speed at 3,000 feet per minute. We're going way too fast. And the speed's increasing, 203 knots now. It's way too fast. 1,000 feet, 201 knots.
I'll try to get the nose up. We'll ride fast.
But even if the crew can get the Airbus on the runway, they face a further problem. Without engines, the normal procedures for braking are severely restricted. For Flight 236, the danger is far from over. The pilots must land the plane without power and somehow get it to stop.
Everybody, I need you to brace.
Airbus hits hard at high speed.
The tires have blown!
Captain Pichet tries to hold the nose down. After bursting 8 tires, the plane finally stops in the middle of the runway.
So we say we made it! We made it! We made it! Yeah, we made it! Yeah!
Come on, everybody, get out of the plane right now. Let's get it. Come on, come on.
Told you we'd make it.
I just wanted to get out of this airplane quickly. I jumped, I hit the ground hard. I don't think my rear end actually even touched the chute at all.
I didn't slide down the slide. I ran down it. And they're just, get out, get out, get out. So you're just running out of this aircraft.
What in God's name just happened? I fell down to the ground, literally, and I started crying.
I mean, once you're off the plane and you're evacuated, you want to know what happened.
Pichet and de Jager had flown their Airbus without power further than any passenger jets in history. As news of their remarkable achievements spread around the world, they found themselves reluctant heroes.
You don't have time really to think about anything else than taking care of the safety of your passenger, you know. That's your main goal, and since we didn't have any engine, the other main goal was to make the landing safely. So at that time, I guess the experience came in, you know. With the help of my colleague, that's why we made a successful landing.
You train for the worst, but you never know how you'll deal with situations like this. And reflecting afterwards, I feel we dealt in the most professional and complete manner we could.
A feeling of being grateful to see all the passengers were okay.
You know, something like this happened, you never know what is going to happen really. I mean, you start not to believe it. I mean, makes no sense that a big jet with 2 engines has no more power with 300 people on board, you know.
But although the public story was a success, disturbing questions remained. Why had a highly sophisticated airliner run out of fuel? What exactly had happened to Flight 236? Away from the cameras, an accident investigation began immediately by the Portuguese, Canadian, and French transport authorities. Initial checks quickly confirmed that all the fuel tanks of the Airbus were indeed empty. But to lose more than 17 tons of fuel in such a short space of time meant they'd had a major leak. The question was, where? Engineers examined the fuel system, searching for faults in the tanks and the fuel lines. It wasn't long before they found what they were looking for, just by the right engine.
In this particular case, you had a hydraulic tube that's relatively small by comparison to the larger fuel tube. And the hydraulic tube, due possibly to pulsations in the hydraulic system, were abrading against the larger tube. And eventually the larger tube had a leak in it, and the leak, or not the leak itself, but the hole eventually possibly led into a fracture of the tube, allowing this massive fuel flow outside of the engine.
The investigators began checking Air Transat maintenance records. They discovered that on the 17th of August, 5 days before the flight, Air Transat had removed the right-hand engine for maintenance and installed a replacement unit sent by Rolls-Royce. But as they analyzed the repair logs for the engine, they uncovered a shocking mistake. This was not a case of faulty design, but of faulty maintenance. Rolls-Royce had supplied the engine without a hydraulic pump assembly. To overcome this, Transat mechanics had used the parts from an older engine. But they didn't fit properly, and the pipes had been rubbing together for 5 days, until, midway over the Atlantic, one finally broke.
The engine was delivered minus these 2 tubes and a bracket. that the purpose of that bracket was to maintain adequate clearance. So if they took the bracket off the old engine and put it on the new engine, is that the pipes would be locked together so that they could possibly abrade. So the mechanics, now I can't fault them, but they were not given specific instructions to verify the 3mm clearance.
As investigators questioned Air Transat mechanics, they found more disturbing evidence of malpractice. The chief mechanic testified that he had been concerned about the substitution of another hydraulic assembly. 5 days before the accident, he raised his concerns with his superior. He was told that it would cost too much to have the aircraft waiting for the missing parts and to go ahead with the substitution. The replacement parts only differed from the correct ones by a few millimeters, but it was a difference that almost cost 306 lives. A few days after the accident, Air Transat publicly accepted responsibility for the faulty maintenance.
We have to realize that there was a small mistake made in terms of changing the pump. We installed it, but then some pipes, so to speak, were needed to be connected to the pump, and there was a mismatch.
The immediate consequences for Air Transat in that event was that they got to pay a fine of $250,000, which was the highest ever in Canada, for an error that could have been prevented.
How someone that is supposed to be qualified in their job can put the wrong part onto an engine and risk 300 people's lives is beyond me.
This incident is a very strong reminder that regulation is important and safety is important, and lives will be lost in the absence of that. And they're real lives. It's not just, you know, this imaginary figure in your head of 300 people. It's real people who suffer and continue to suffer. As a result. If it hadn't been us suffering, it would have been our families.
This was by no means the end of the story. Investigators now turn their attention to the cockpit itself. What role had the crew played in the events of August the 24th? Could they have done more to avert the crisis? Key questions remained unanswered. Questions about what happened on the flight deck. The investigation into Air Transat Flight 236 discovered that basic maintenance errors had led to the fuel leak. Air Transat accepted responsibility and were heavily fined. But the focus now turned on the flight deck and the performance of the crew. What part did they play in the fuel loss?
Wing crossfeed. On.
On.
When the crew opened the crossfeed valve to transfer fuel from the left wing tank to the right, they lost 17 tons of fuel in less than 30 minutes. Yet they failed to close the crossfeed valve and prevent further loss.
Mayday, mayday. We have lost both engines due to fuel starvation. We are gliding now.
In the days after the incident, Captain Robert Pichet and Dirk de Jager were called before the inquiry and asked in detail about their actions. More than 2 years later, these findings have still not been published. What follows are possible explanations for the course of events that night, based on known facts and expert opinion.
Oil temp low and oil pressure high on number 2.
The warnings of high oil pressure and low oil temperature from the engine on the right wing would not have led the pilots to suspect that there was already a major fuel leak.
The indications that were being presented with respect to the oil system would probably not give the crew any indications. They may have questioned what was causing the erroneous or strange indications, But there's nothing, certainly in my mind or their training, I think that would have triggered them to suspect that a fuel system might be involved.
Bet you it's a computer problem.
But although the pilots thought they had a computer error, the oil warnings were actually correct and were the first indication of a much more serious problem.
Fuel imbalance warning. Haven't seen that before.
When the fuel imbalance warning came up 20 minutes later, showing less fuel in the right wing than the left, it seemed unconnected with the oil alarms. This could have reinforced Captain Pichet's idea that he was facing a series of computer errors.
Do not apply this procedure if a fuel leak is suspected.
Despite his doubts, Captain Pichet was obliged to follow Airbus procedure to correct the imbalance. He opened the crossfeed valve.
Wing crossfeed. On.
But was following the checklist enough?
You just can't idly flip switches in response to commands from the computers and anticipate that all will be well at the end of it. Once the checklist is complete, we can sit there fat, dumb, and happy. That's not the case at all. You got to keep second guessing it. Is that right? Did we do the right checklist? Have we got the results that we need?
Once the pilots calculated the high rate of fuel loss, they should have suspected a major leak.
Transat 236 Heavy declaring fuel emergency.
By the time they had confirmed the leak, their options were severely limited.
They were flying blind, as it were. There was no checklist information provided to them. They assumed that once they had engaged in this procedure that the situation would resolve itself, and it wasn't. Now they had a choice. Do I close the crossfeed and see what happens, or do I leave the crossfeed open as the fuel imbalance checklist has dictated, and maybe the situation will correct itself? The crew wasn't really sure. It wasn't an eventuality. It wasn't a situation that they had been trained for, I'm sure. They were in new ground with really no guidance to help them. If they left the crossfeed open, or whether they closed the crossfeed, I would only be speculating as to what changes it might have resulted in the outcome in this event.
Captain Pichet believed for a long time that he was facing a computer error. It was only when the engines finally stopped that he had to accept the fuel leak was genuine. The technological complexity of modern aircraft can help to make them safer and more reliable, but it can also lead to the problems that nearly brought catastrophe to Air Transat 236. Discrepancies in replacement parts led to a fuel leak. Distrust of computers led the crew to misread the situation. These errors combined to have huge implications. Only because air traffic control initially sent the plane 60 miles south to avoid congestion was Flight 236 close enough to the Azores when the crisis struck. Otherwise, it would have had to ditch in the ocean. The investigation remains unpublished. Airbus blamed the pilots for mishandling the fuel leak. Robert Pichet and Dirk de Jager continued to fly with Air Transat. In August 2002, they received the highest honors of the Airline Pilots Association for the longest glide ever accomplished in a passenger airline. After the accident, Airbus modified its checklist in the event of fuel imbalance. From now on, the computer checks all the fuel levels on board against the flight plan. It now gives a clear warning if more fuel is being lost than the engines can consume. Rolls-Royce has reissued a service bulletin, alerting all its clients of the incompatibility of two almost similar parts. For the passengers trapped on Flight 236, the trauma has left them with mixed feelings.
All right, I stabilized the speed.
This accident wasn't caused by simply one omission by any one individual, as is typical of most aircraft accidents. There's a whole chain of events, a whole series of events that lead to the incident or to the accident, and this accident was no different.
Whatever the circumstances are, the pressure that he was under is tremendous. He got that plane down safely, only blew out 8 of the 12 tires, and saved 300 people. He saved 300 people's lives.
Captain Pichet saved our lives, and whether or not he made an error, or if there was a failure of a computer, it doesn't really matter because we're alive.
Do I think he's a hero? No. Do I think he's a hell of a pilot? Yes.
Thank God the islands of the Azores were there and basically saved our lives. But if that fuel pump broke 5 minutes beforehand, we would have ended up into the water, and I probably wouldn't be here to tell the story.
At the time, it was the worst crash in aviation history.
It was just a scene of absolute, utter devastation.
In 1974, more than 300 people died when their plane fell from the sky.
There's barely anything left here that's recognizable as being a part of an aircraft.
You couldn't walk anywhere without the danger you were going to stand on a part of a human being.
The key to understanding the disaster is found thousands of kilometers away. An unusual piece of evidence that tells the troubling story of a crash that could have been prevented.
Mayday, Mayday.
June the 12th, 1972. One of the newest members of American Airlines fleet is in Detroit, Michigan.
John, Page.
Flight 96, a brand new DC-10, is getting ready for takeoff. Captain Bryce McCormick and co-pilot Paige Whitney have been in the plane for hours.
Back there, so when we're in flight, if you can get a chance just to look at that.
Detroit is just a stopover on a flight from LA to Buffalo and then to New York.
You got there? You ready to try one, Paige?
All right, sir.
McCormick has flown the plane out from California, but Whitney is going to fly the next leg. Both men want as much time at the controls as possible. Neither one of them has more than 75 hours flying the DC-10. Few pilots have more. There simply aren't enough of the planes in the air. In 1972, the DC-10 had just been introduced. The plane is the latest advance to passenger jets. Its style and its size set it apart from other airliners. The McDonnell Douglas Corporation has spent more than $1 billion developing it.
In the late 60s, there was a race going among the three major manufacturers of jetliners, McDonnell Douglas, Boeing, and Lockheed, to see who could get the first jumbo out. So they got really busy on getting this DC-10 into production as fast as they could. And one of the things that they could not suffer were many delays based on some problem with the design.
American Airlines is one of the first companies to buy the plane. Flight 96 is one of those planes. Just the 5th DC-10 ever built. Cydia Smith has just been trained to be the chief flight attendant on the DC-10.
I was excited because it was one of the first jumbos that we had. And I was going to have the opportunity to fly number 1, which is what I always wanted to do on a big jet.
Okay, you got it? Hand on the wheel. I got you. E1, rotate.
Just after 7 in the evening, Flight 96 lifts off from Detroit Airport. Just minutes after takeoff, the plane is rising easily through 3,500 meters over Windsor, Ontario, Canada.
I was sitting in my seat, and the captain had turned off the fasten seatbelt sign, and I was making my way to the galley, and I had to go sort of downhill because we were climbing to go to the galley to turn on the coffee. When I punched the coffee and I moved over to one side, that's when it happened. I remember falling over because the plane was like this, but all of a sudden it just went like this. I saw ceiling compartments fall, and I saw things coming out of pockets and everything, and I thought to myself, oh boy. It felt like the last day of my life.
We hit something! We lost an engine here!
In the cockpit, the crew is fighting for control of their jet. The throttles which control the 3 engines have snapped to idle. The plane loses almost all its thrust. The huge jet begins slowing down.
The plane immediately took a huge drop. And the next thing that happened was I was hit in the face with a piece of the plane. My husband was frantically trying to find a stewardess to give me something to put a pressure on my face to stop the bleeding.
Let me have it!
McCormick takes over control of the plane. He and Whitney wrestle the jet level. But Flight 96 has been badly damaged.
Have we got hydraulics? No, I've got full rudder here.
The rudder on the tail, which controls the direction of the jet, is jammed to the right. That's forcing the plane to swing dramatically in that direction. While McCormick fights to turn his damaged plane back to Detroit, Cydia Smith is shocked to see a gaping hole in the floor of the main passenger cabin.
People were asking me, what to do, and I knew that I didn't know what to tell them.
Smith has been able to account for all of her passengers. But flight attendant Sandra McConnell is missing.
Sandra! Can you hear me? Sandra, where are you?
And finally, I saw her come out of one of the bathrooms.
McConnell has to cross the hole in the floor to move to safety.
And almost every step she took, the floor kept collapsing.
The crew brings up power to the engines on the wings. But the third engine on the tail stubbornly refuses to respond.
Center, this is American Airlines Flight 96. We got an emergency.
American 96, roger. Type of emergency?
We've got a jammed rudder. We need to get down and make an approach.
Along with his engine and his rudder, McCormick is also having trouble controlling the elevators on the tail of the plane. They help him move the massive plane up and down. They're slow to respond, but he can move them. The situation isn't completely hopeless.
I think it's going to fly!
American 96, turn further right, heading 200.
Without complete control of the elevators, and with a rudder that's frozen to the right, McCormick has to use his engines to turn the plane. By increasing the thrust on one side of the plane, he can change direction. But it won't be fast.
I have no rudder control whatsoever, so our turns are going to have to be very slow and cautious.
All of the passengers move as far away from the hole in the back as possible. But apart from the cut to Loretta Kaminsky, so far there are no other serious injuries.
Captain, there's a hole in the back of the plane.
A hole?
Yes, sir. What do you want us to do?
Get everyone ready for an emergency landing.
Bryce McCormick's DC-10 is badly damaged. The lives of everyone on board now depend entirely on his ability to land a plane that can barely fly. With explosive suddenness, a short flight from Detroit to Buffalo has become the most challenging flight of Captain Bryce McCormick's career. He's down an engine, and he can't move his rudder. As he heads back to Detroit, McCormick begins to slow his plane down so it can land safely. But when he does, his plane begins falling dangerously fast. Ideally, McCormick should be descending at 700 feet a minute. But now he's falling more than twice that fast. 1,600 feet per minute.
What's the sink rate? Sink rate, 1,600!
At this rate, McCormick will crash well short of the runway. He increases power to his engines to slow his fall.
Sink rate, 700.
McCormick has slowed the plane's descent to 700 feet per minute. But to do that, he's had to increase his forward airspeed, which means he'll be landing far faster than usual. For the first time since the beginning of the crisis, McCormick talks to the passengers.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking.
We've had a small problem, but the plane is under control now, and we're heading back to Detroit for an emergency landing.
Bryce McCormick was as calm as if he were welcoming you on the plane.
As the plane nears the airport, flight attendants ask passengers to remove their shoes and any sharp pieces of jewelry.
They had to take off their shoes and glasses. We collected everything in a blanket.
Less than half an hour after leaving, the badly damaged DC-10 struggles back to the Detroit airport.
The few minutes that it took to get back to Detroit were the longest minutes that I will ever remember spending on an airplane, because we were sure that we were not going to survive.
Captain Bryce McCormick now needs to give the jet even more power to push the nose up for landing. His plane is still drifting to the right and traveling fast.
I have no rudder to straighten it out when it hits.
The DC-10 with 67 people aboard roars toward the runway at almost 300 kilometers an hour.
The landing was the most frightening part of the entire flight.
When the plane hits the ground, it begins veering hard to the right.
Once the plane landed, it seemed like we just went on forever. I mean, it was just forever.
One set of landing gear wheels runs off the runway and through the grass. After a harrowing touchdown, the plane eventually comes to a stop just 300 meters from the end of the runway.
Okay. Engines off at your discretion.
Shut him down.
Every woman wanted to hug him, and he was just amazing. Because it was just at that moment that we all realized that we were alive because of him, that he literally had saved our lives.
If you take a look at something like this and you say, well, there's good flying and there's bad flying, this is beyond good. This is superlative. This is using every instinct you have as an airman and all the capabilities you have to stay calm enough to get the situation assessed.
With the plane on the ground, the crew has its first opportunity to inspect the damage.
The captain and I walked back when everybody was off. We walked back to the back, and we just looked up and saw this hole. And it was just so weird.
There's no indication that the jet hit something as the pilots first thought. What has caused such damage to the airliner?
The hole was so enormous that if anyone had been sitting in the seats that were there, they would have been sucked out immediately. At that point, they still felt it might have been a bomb.
But while the incident had happened with explosive suddenness, no indication of a bomb is found. As investigators begin their work, they discover that not all of the DC-10 is at the Detroit airport. A coffin that the plane was carrying in its cargo hold is discovered 30 kilometers away from the Detroit airport, near Windsor, Ontario, Canada. Investigators also find the plane's rear cargo door.
Doors are not supposed to fall off airplanes, especially since it was a rather new airplane. You would not expect something like that to happen.
When they examine the cargo area of the plane, they discover that the very design of the door makes it a potential weak spot.
These don't look like they...
Most doors on a jet open inward. In fact, the door is slightly larger than the frame it fits into. As the pressure builds inside a jet, this type of plug door is actually forced into the frame of the aircraft. The design makes the door extremely safe. But McDonnell Douglas designed the cargo door on the DC-10 to open outward. That decision was made to increase the amount of storage space on the plane. When it's closed, hooks on the DC-10's door grab hold of a bar on the plane's doorframe. To make sure it's closed, baggage handlers push down on a lever, which drives locking pins through the hooks, which hold them in place. When investigators examine the cargo area of the plane, they don't find any structural damage around the door. When they study the locks on the cargo door itself, they find that the latches are not completely closed. And the pins that are supposed to make sure the door is locked are not in their locked position.
When we interrogated the cargo handler that closed the door, it became immediately apparent that he used excessive force to close the door. And in fact, he said he had to use his knee to get the door handle to go flush.
Investigators make a frightening discovery. It's possible to close the lever on the outside of the door, even if the hooks and locking pins are not in the closed position. Paul Eddy is a journalist who investigated the history of the DC-10.
What Windsor showed is that you could actually pull the handle in order to buckle the top fixture so that the handle went home properly, but the locking pins had not gone through the spools.
Engage the lever.
This means that baggage handlers can believe the door is closed when it's not. Not only can the outside lever be closed without the locks being fully engaged, there's no way for the crew of the plane to know. The faulty locking pins will still turn off the warning light, even though they aren't in their proper position. The door was a ticking time bomb. As passenger jets climb, the difference between the pressure inside the plane and the pressure outside the plane grows. If a door isn't properly shut, it will blow out with explosive force. The problem on the American Airlines flight began as the plane passed through 3,500 meters. When the door blew, the coffin in the cargo hold was sucked out. When the air pressure inside the plane was released, anything that wasn't firmly attached was pulled out of the airliner.
It's a really startling thing if you're not expecting it. What you've got is a lot of air stuffed inside this pressure vessel that now wants to get out. And the bigger the airplane is, the more powerful the hurricane of air leaving the airplane is during that period of time.
By itself, explosive decompression does not make a plane unflyable. So why had Captain McCormick experienced such difficulties controlling his jet? Investigators take a closer look at the back of the plane's cabin and learn that the very design of the DC-10 makes it vulnerable. When the cargo door blew off, there was so much pressure on the floor of the cabin that it collapsed into the cargo compartment below. When it did, the floor ripped into some of the plane's critical control systems.
When it collapsed the floor, it took the cables that controlled number 2 engine, and it took most of the cables, or impeded most of the cables that had to do with the flight controls in the back.
I think it's going to fly!
It left McCormick just enough control to keep his plane level. The remarkable flying of Bryce McCormick had saved the lives of everyone on board Flight 96. But there was a problem with one of the newest and most expensive planes flying over North America.
In the Windsor incident, there was an obvious flaw. And that's where the NTSB said, look, here is really the smoking gun, the ability to close that thing without having all those locks engaged. Let's make sure we change this system right now. Every DC-10 operator needs to know this.
I want everything checked. I want all the bolts checked first.
Chuck Miller is the head of the NTSB's Aviation Safety Bureau.
We have to check all the latches, okay? Every single latch.
It's his responsibility to point out problems with the new DC-10 and propose solutions. He helps write the fixes he thinks McDonnell Douglas needs to make to keep the plane safe.
He was a very, very professional man, and he had his investigators had enormous respect for him. Chuck didn't sit back in the office. Chuck was always on the scene.
For Chuck Miller, fixing the DC-10 is a matter of professional pride. For McDonnell Douglas, the near accident over Windsor has enormous implications. Their billion-dollar gamble came close to tumbling from the sky. If anything else goes wrong, The company itself could be at stake. March the 3rd, 1974. A perfect spring-like day in Paris. It's been almost 2 years since a DC-10 came close to crashing near Windsor, Ontario. Now more than 50 of the new planes are flying around the world. One of them, Plane 29, is owned by Turkish Airlines. Normally, the last leg of this trip from Turkey to England wouldn't be very crowded. But today, the DC-10 is filling up fast. People are squeezing into seats throughout the plane. A strike at a British airline has passengers scrambling for any flight back to London. Wendy Wheel is one of many last-minute additions to the flight. A model, she's returning home after a shoot in Spain.
We'd been married for 18 months, and we were about to start a family. I believe the secret of her success for modeling was not just that she was a very attractive girl and good model material, but she was generally liked by all the photographers because she had such a pleasing, lovely, light personality.
With all the new passengers boarding, the flight is a little behind schedule. And it's not only the crew who are waiting. At the back of the plane is baggage handler Mohammed Mahmoudi. With all the new passengers, he's not sure if there are any more bags to load.
C'est tout. Vous êtes fini. Bien, j'ai l'affaire.
Not expecting any other luggage, Mahmoudi locks the rear cargo door. The DC-10 is set to go. Just after 12:30 in the afternoon, THY Flight 981 lifts off into the skies above Paris. London is less than an hour away.
Race control, this is Tango Hotel Yankee 981. We're at 60, requesting clearance to flight level 230.
Tango Hotel Yankee 981, you are cleared to flight level 230.
981, roger.
As it flies away from the airport, the DC-10 continues to gain altitude. 2,700 meters, 3,000 meters, 3,300 meters. The huge jet shudders and banks to the left.
What happened? The cabin blew out! Are you sure?
Just 16 seconds after the start of the crisis, the crew struggles to save their crippled jet. The nose is pitching down, the plane picking up speed.
Bring it up! I can't bring it up! She doesn't respond!
Passengers at the back of the plane witness a horrifying scene. 2 rows of seats have simply disappeared. Through a huge hole in the floor, passengers can see the sky over France.
7,000 feet! Hydraulics! We've lost it!
The crew discovers that they have no hydraulic power with which to control the plane. Without it, they can't move their rudder or elevators. Even without its most basic controls, the plane begins to level out. But it's fallen too far.
Looks like we're going to hit the ground! Speed!
The DC-10 is traveling almost 800 kilometers an hour. The flight from Paris to London never even makes it to the English Channel. Just 9 minutes after taking off, Turkish Airways Flight 981 becomes the worst plane crash of all time. In London, the flight is listed as delayed. The news of the crash comes out slowly.
I went to the ticket office kiosk and I asked what has happened to the flight, and instantly the look on the gentleman's face behind the counter told me something was wrong, instantly.
There's barely anything left here that's recognizable as being a part of an aircraft.
I looked on the television and I just thought, well, I just hope she's dead, because I just saw the carnage of the forest in Senlis, and it was like looking at a First World War trench movie.
Flight 981, carrying 346 passengers, virtually disintegrates on impact. There are no survivors.
It was just a scene of absolute, utter devastation. And the litter of personal possessions, electric wires, bits of metal, bits of bodies, just strewn everywhere. I mean, you couldn't walk anywhere without the danger you were going to stand on a part of a human being. I still have nightmares about this, even though it's 33 years ago.
Investigators for the French Accident Investigation Bureau are quickly on the scene.
My first job was to evaluate the scope of the wreckage and to begin the first investigation on the spot. At first I was unable to know what has happened. I was just seeing that a terrible crash has occurred and that it will be a very hard work for the investigators.
Despite the enormous force of the crash, the black boxes, made of 3 layers of hardened steel and insulation, survive. Their contents could provide valuable clues about the crash.
Most of the speculation was that it must have been a bomb, because, you know, you've got a almost brand new, very powerful aeroplane flying in clear blue sky, and it gets to 12,000 feet and falls out of it.
Investigators are called to a field 15 kilometers from the crash site. They find a piece of fuselage and 2 rows of seats from the DC-10. Somehow, they fell free of the airliner before the rest of the plane smashed into the forest. When investigators arrive, the bodies of the passengers who were in the seats have already been removed. When relatives of those who died in the crash arrive in France, they're directed to a small church in the town of Senlis.
One of the saddest sights I've ever seen is in this church. They laid out on tables everything they'd found, you know, clothing, possessions, teddy bears, rings, watches. And then relatives who wanted to were allowed to come and walk around these trestle tables with all this stuff laid out.
They produced a little packet with my wife's wedding ring and rings, engagement ring. It was all pretty battered up, so you could imagine the thoughts that went through my mind.
Since the accident involves an American plane, the NTSB's Chuck Miller joins the investigation. For the second time in 2 years, he's dealing with a problem with the DC-10.
I don't believe that Miller suspected for one moment that the door hadn't been fixed after Windsor.
But it becomes clear that the piece of fuselage found in France is in fact the plane's rear cargo door. It seems like a repeat of the Windsor accident. Miller is left with a haunting question. Why hadn't the problem been fixed?
When he saw the door, of course, saw that it hadn't been done. The fix hadn't been made. And that's when I think his anger became very, very strong indeed.
Miller takes an unusual step. Although the official investigation is just beginning, he gives journalist Paul Eddy an important tip.
I said, have you got any ideas what made the door come off? He said, yeah. Well, if I were you, I'd go and look at a place called Windsor, Ontario.
Hello. I'm Chuck Miller.
Miller shares his suspicions with the French investigators.
Could you please pass these around? These were taken on June 12th, 1972, right after the incident.
We have asked for the report on the Windsor accident, and our American colleagues were also volunteers to give us a lot of details.
Now, we had an American Airlines flight from Detroit to Buffalo have its cargo door blow off.
And he has been very frank and had explained what he was thinking of the Windsor accident.
After all the work done during the American Airlines investigation, had something been overlooked? Was there another problem with McDonnell Douglas's enormous plane? With the information from Chuck Miller, French investigators take a closer look at the plane's cargo door. They make a shocking discovery. There is no new problem. It's just like the American Airlines case all over again. The latches that are supposed to hold the cargo door closed aren't locked. And since 2 rows of seats were sucked out of the DC-10 over Paris, it's clear that the floor on the plane collapsed, just as it had in Windsor.
It looks like we're going to hit the ground!
In fact, when investigators listen to the cockpit voice recorder, they find that the Turkish flight crew had even less control of their plane than the crew of American Airlines Flight 96.
We need to get down and make an approach. I think it's going to fly.
Over Windsor, Bryce McCormick was able to recover his plane and land it. But in Paris, all the hydraulic systems were destroyed.
We've lost it!
The hydraulic fluid helps crews move the rudder and elevators on the tail. Not being able to control them meant the crew couldn't keep their plane in the sky.
The basic problem was the Paris flight was much heavier in terms of the number of people on board. The floor, when it collapsed with such a tremendous amount of pressure that it literally severed all the cables and control to the back. They had no hope after that point.
You and each of you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about
Shortly after the crash of Turkish Airlines Flight 981, Chuck Miller is back in the United States.
Our first witness this morning is Mr. C.O. Miller, Director of the Bureau of Aviation Safety of the NTSB.
This time, he's facing questions from American senators.
of potentially catastrophic design
A
defects.
special hearing begins to find out how a problem that was identified in 1972 could bring another plane down 2 years later.
Of course, our understanding up to this time, they all had been.
What you've got to now discover is why wasn't that door fixed? Why would a major, venerable, mighty American corporation deliberately do something like this?
Less than a month after the near crash over Windsor, the NTSB had made two very specific recommendations. Miller and his investigators recommended that a change be made to the locking mechanism.
Engage the lever.
They wanted to make sure that it was physically impossible for baggage handlers to close the lever without the locking pins being in place. They also suggested that vents be put into the floors of all DC-10s. This would rapidly allow the pressurized cabin air to equalize without collapsing the floor. But in the 2 years since the accident, neither one of these recommendations was implemented.
There is a fundamental problem at the heart of aviation safety, and that has been in the United States for a very long time, and that is that it's the job of the NTSB to discover what's happened and to come up with recommendations as to how to prevent it happening again, but it has absolutely no authority to implement them.
The NTSB does not have regulatory authority. They have to turn to the FAA, as they did, and say, we want these things done. And that's where the system went wrong.
If the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, issues an airworthiness directive, planes are pulled out of service until the proper fix is made. But as serious as the problems on the DC-10 were, no airworthiness directive was ever issued. A so-called gentleman's agreement between the head of the FAA and the head of McDonnell Douglas stopped it from happening.
The gentleman's agreement is the root cause of Paris. There is no question that if an airworthiness directive had been issued, as it should have been after Windsor, Paris would not have happened. It was an entirely avoidable accident.
McDonnell Douglas assured the FAA that it would fix the problem voluntarily. An airworthiness directive would cast a shadow on the still fledgling DC-10.
The last thing in the world you want is for the public or any of the airlines who are going to be operating these airplanes to think, oh, maybe there's some flaws in this bird. And so an airworthiness directive, especially one that requires you to go back and re-engineer something, is a really horrific thought for a manufacturer.
McDonnell Douglas did make changes to the way the cargo door was built. A peephole was cut in the bottom of the door so baggage handlers could see if the locking pins had engaged. Several warning signs were also attached to the plane's door. The company also made other changes to the DC-10. These included increasing the length of the locking pins and attaching a plate to the inside of the door. This plate would make it physically impossible to push down the lever if the door wasn't properly locked. But each of the proposed fixes had its own problem. Many baggage handlers didn't know what the small window in the door was for. And the baggage handler in Paris read and spoke 3 languages, but not English, the only language in which the warning signs were written. The support plate that was supposed to be installed in the door was never attached to the jet that crashed in Paris. Papers confirming the completion of the work are also uncovered. But no matter what the paper trail says, the fix was never made.
Again, the problem is you don't have an independent FAA inspector coming along to look and see it and then put his stamp on it because it wasn't an airworthiness directive.
In the years following the Turkish Airlines crash, an enormous flurry of lawsuits are filed in California. The tragic story of the DC-10 has one more surprise in store. It's 1974, and an unprecedented series of lawsuits are being filed against McDonnell Douglas. The families of those who died near Paris want someone held responsible.
As time went by, I learned more and more about what actually happened and realized that it was not an accident as we would call an accident. It was totally avoidable. My goal was to expose these people.
In the weeks leading up to the trial, lawyers who are involved in the case have access to the entire history of the DC-10's development. They're not the only ones who pore through the evidence. So does journalist Paul Eddy.
We were determined to get to those documents and that testimony. Somebody gave us a key to the depository where the documents were, and so at night we would go in and then had a huge accumulated pile of documents to go through in order to find out what they've been up to.
Reading through the immense pile of paper, Eddy makes an incredible discovery. A memo written by Don Applegate, the director of product engineering for Convair, the company who'd built the cargo door for McDonnell Douglas.
I think the point when we knew we got them was the Applegate memorandum that specifically pre-warned this would happen.
The memo is a damning indictment of the cargo doors that were being made for the DC-10 and the lack of venting in the cabin floors. It warns that it's only a matter of time before there's a major disaster involving the doors.
The airplane demonstrated an inherent susceptibility to catastrophic failure when exposed to explosive decompression of the cargo compartment.
The memo, written just weeks after the near disaster in Windsor, recommends that immediate changes be made to the DC-10 cargo door.
You know you've got them. You know you've got them because you know they knew.
During the court case, another chilling find is made. Not only did McDonnell Douglas know about the problem after Windsor, they knew during the development of the DC-10. 4 years before the Paris crash, 2 years before Windsor, the cargo door failed during a pressure test. The company knew there was a problem, but the fundamental design of the door stayed the same.
I could not believe a large corporation, McDonnell Douglas at the time, could do such a thing, could risk our lives, ordinary people's lives, for the sake of money.
Well, in aviation, it's called tombstone technology. In other words, we always have the balance of money. And unfortunately, over the years, it has been true more times than not that we have had to wait until we had enough people die in an accident to say, you know, we really are going to have to spend the money over here.
The Applegate memo and other information that comes out during the court case leads to one of the biggest settlements in the history of aviation. McDonnell Douglas paid over $80 million in damages. After the Paris crash, foolproof changes were finally made to the DC-10 cargo door. And this time, nothing was left to chance. The FAA issued an airworthiness directive that ensured the doors would never again open in mid-air. And it worked. After Paris, there wasn't another serious incident involving the cargo doors on a DC-10. But the plane's history and an intensely competitive industry did have an impact. McDonnell Douglas sold far fewer commercial DC-10s than it had once hoped for.
Most of the pilots that I know who have flown the DC-10 over the years really love the old bird. She's probably a little more clunky than the 747 in terms of her heaviness of flight controls, but it's still a lovely bird to fly.
That's fine, but you can't disassociate either the airplane or the company from the awful reputation that the crash left.
Eventually, McDonnell Douglas itself disappears. The company was bought by Boeing in 1996. In the forest outside Paris, a monument now stands honoring those who were killed on Flight 981. A permanent reminder of one of the most disturbing crashes in the history of aviation.
You never forget. And I've gone on to lead my life for 30-odd years, but I've never forgotten. People to this day think it was an accident, and it wasn't.
High above the Mediterranean, two pilots struggle with a stalled engine.
Engine relights. Negative. Stop. Engine 1 is flamed out.
45 miles from land, the pilots make a difficult decision.
Prepare to ditch. Oh my God, be merciful.
Passengers are forced to make life or death decisions on their own.
Do not inflate your vest!
The accident will tear families apart, set in motion a massive rescue effort at sea, and trigger a multinational investigation to discover why both engines on one of the world's most popular planes stopped in mid-flight. August the 6th, 2005, Bari, Italy. An ancient port town on the Adriatic Sea, where the past meets the present. Just north of this historic city, Bari International Airport serves 10 major airlines and more than 1.5 million passengers each year. One of those carriers is Tunisia's Tuninter Airlines. Captain Shafiq Garbi is a pilot with Tuninter. Today, he's in command of Flight 1153. The 45-year-old Tunisian is a military-trained pilot with a flawless flight record. Garbi's co-pilot is 28-year-old Ali Kabair.
How much fuel are you adding?
400 kilograms.
2,700 total?
Yes.
Captain Garbi and his co-pilot flew from Tunis to Bari this morning to collect 34 Italian passengers. Now they're going to fly them to Jerba, a Tunisian resort island. Among the passengers is 31-year-old police officer Luca Squicciarini. His girlfriend Paola is traveling with him.
Our first choice wasn't Jerba, it was Cape Verde. The thing with Cape Verde is that it was a period of terrorist activities. The flight would have left from either Rome or Milan. Since they are two large airports, Paola was afraid that there would be an attack, so we chose not to go to Cape Verde. It was my first trip with Paola. We met the previous winter. We had plans to marry the following year.
To tighten your belt, pull on the loose end of the strap. To release your seatbelt, lift the upper portion of the buckle. Please
Ladies and gentlemen, your life vests are located beneath your seats. To inflate the vest, pull firmly on the red cord, only when you're leaving the aircraft. If you need to refill the vest, blow into the mouthpiece.
TS LBB, flight 1153, permission for takeoff granted.
Roger that. Clear for takeoff. Final prep for departure.
The crew is flying a French-made ATR-72. The small turboprop is perfect for short flights. It doesn't need a lot of maintenance or guzzle a lot of fuel. Just after 2:30 in the afternoon, the plane takes off. 49 minutes after takeoff, Flight 1153 is 400 miles away from its destination, Djerba.
So we started chatting with other passengers. We were all excited. We talked about the vacation.
Like Luca and Paola, Barbara Baldacci is on her way to Djerba for a vacation with her fiancé Francesco.
Barbara aveva 23 anni.
Barbara was 23 years old. She was on the verge of realizing her lifelong dream of graduating in biology. After writing her final exam, she decided to take this vacation with her fiancé, Francesco.
Then 75 miles from the nearest land, and 23,000 feet above the sea, the plane's right engine stops working.
We've lost engine number 2. Let's get to 17,000 feet.
TUI 1153, request 170.
TUI 11.
Captain Garbi begins an emergency descent.
Sending 170.
When you have a single engine flameout, you would descend down to a lower altitude, the air is thicker, the propeller is more efficient.
Under current conditions, the ATR-72 can best fly on one engine at an altitude of 17,000 feet.
Power lever, flight idle, start button.
The crew struggles to restart the right engine.
Negative. Fuel supply, check.
But then, less than 2 minutes after the first engine quits,
Stop! Stop. Engine number 1 is flamed out.
both of the plane's engines have stopped.
Si è spento inizialmente il motore destro.
The engine shut off.
Inizialmente pensavamo fosse addirittura un
Our
attentato.
first thought was of a terrorist attack, since there were so many at the time. We tried to figure out what was happening, so we looked towards the cockpit to see if someone was trying to sabotage the plane.
Se qualcuno voleva sabotare l'aereo.
The plane is now falling to the sea at 800 feet per minute.
Mayday! 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 DUI 1153. We have lost both engines. Request immediate landing at Palermo.
The crew still hopes to reach an airport, but they have 70 miles of ocean to cross before they're over land. Crews are trained for almost anything. There's a checklist for them to follow to solve most problems, including what to do when both engines die.
Both engines flame out checklist. Fuel supply, check.
The pilots don't know why their engines have stopped. The only clue they're getting is a low fuel feed warning.
A low pressure warning light tells the pilot that there's low fuel pressure going to the engine. Now that could be a mechanical problem, or that could be a contamination problem.
The crew follows the steps laid out by the manufacturer to relight their dead engines.
Fuel supply, check. Power lever, flight idle. Start button. Engine relight. Negative.
Get Shokri.
The captain asks the cabin crew to bring the onboard engineer, Shokri Haboui, to the cockpit.
Palermo approach. This is TUI 1153. We have lost both engines. Request immediate landing.
The closest airport is in Palermo, on the Italian island of Sicily.
TUI 1153, Palermo. Affirmative, you are clear for landing.
Palermo approach. What is our distance to the airport?
Your distance to Palermo is now 48 nautical miles.
An ATR-72 will fall from the sky at a predictable rate. 1 foot down for every 16 feet forward. 48 nautical miles is further than the plane can glide.
I don't think we're gonna make it.
If they can't restart their engines soon, they'll be forced to ditch in the sea.
Ditching at sea is a very difficult decision to make because it's the hardest thing to do. You have swells, waves, wind. Is anybody going to see you? How long can the plane float for?
Landing a passenger plane on water is extremely dangerous. In 1996, an Ethiopian Airlines pilot was forced to bring his 767 down on the Indian Ocean. The ditching was recorded by a tourist on a nearby beach. 50 people survived, but 125 people died. The crew of this small plane doesn't usually include an engineer. When there is one on board, he usually travels in the cabin.
I remember this person looked at the stewardess and shook his head as if saying no after the second engine had shut off.
Per cui allo spegnimento di tutti e due I motori. Per cui lì ho capito che stava cercando di fare qualcosa per
That gesture showed there was nothing left to do.
far funzionare questo aereo, però mi sa.
The crew of Flight 1153 has tried all it can. They're running out of time and options. Flight engineer Shokri Haboui has joined in the struggle to get Flight 1153's engines started.
You've run the checklist?
Yes.
The captain hopes the engineer will know something that isn't covered by the checklist.
Attempt to restart the engines. Right engine first.
Fuel supply, check. Engine 2 start, power button, on. Engine relight, negative.
Palermo approach, TUI 1153. Any closer airport where we can land?
Negative, 1153.
Palermo Airport is the closest airport to your position.
We're not gonna make it. Prepare to ditch. Oh my God, be merciful.
A me non hanno detto nulla. Io mi sono accorto che qualcosa non andava.
No one said anything. I noticed something wasn't right because the two engines shut off. More than once, I tried to get the stewardess's attention, asking what I should do. If I had to put on the life jacket, if I had to stand, if I should take off my shoes. I got no answer. She was in shock and started to cry.
Era sotto shock e ha pianto.
The senior flight attendant does give the passengers direction.
The captain has decided to land the plane at sea.
I'll let you imagine the panic on board. People were screaming and crying.
Please stay calm and follow your crew's instructions.
There were people in the front seats that had a baby girl. She had been playing and was so excited. To now see the panic in her mother's face made me feel so sad.
TUI 1153. What is your fuel load?
Cockpit fuel quantity 1,800 kilograms.
Captain Garbi's fuel gauge shows that he has plenty of fuel. But for some reason, neither engine will restart. Just 10 minutes after the trouble began, the plane is 7,000 feet above the ocean and falling. Outside, it's completely silent. But in the cabin, there's panic.
Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened.
My first instinct was to undo my seatbelt to prevent getting trapped when we hit the water. I didn't want to be trapped in my seat and go down in a horrible way. Secondly, I put on my life jacket and quickly blew it up. I did this to soften the blow of the impact.
Il giubbino di salvataggio e l'ho gonfiato subito.
Do not inflate your vests until you left the plane.
A plane ditching at sea will more than likely fill with water. That's why safety procedures call for passengers to only inflate their life vests once they've cleared the plane. Otherwise, they could become trapped inside the flooded fuselage and drown. In the Ethiopian Airlines crash, many passengers ignored this advice and drowned after surviving the initial impact.
Negative.
The dead engines aren't the only problem confronting the crew.
Engine 2 start, power.
Many of their instruments get their power from the engines. Without the engines, some vital gauges are dead.
On a 2-engine flameout, you go on your standby instruments, which is you have an attitude indicator, you have an altimeter.
Fuel supply, check.
The crew continues to try to restart their engines, but it's become clear that they've run out of time.
They're not doing anything.
Confirm distance, please.
Your
Distance is now
20 miles.
Boats. I see boats.
Choosing to ditch near a ship or a vessel is not written in any checklist. It's just good airmanship because rescue can start immediately and it increases your chances of survival.
Palermo approach. It's TUI 1153. We can't make it to the airport. We see 2 boats on the left side. We're going there. If you can, please call.
Captain Garbi turns his plane towards the boats.
Can you send helicopters or something similar? Fast, fast, fast.
emergency. All marine units, aircraft in distress, 20 nautical miles off Palermo.
Even before the plane hits the water, rescuers are on their way.
I had very little information. We didn't know the nature of the crash or anything about the plane.
Autopress. Dump.
Although it's a rare maneuver, there is also a checklist for ditching a plane in the water. Before ditching, the crew ensures all landing gear is retracted to help the plane land more smoothly.
Landing gear lever up.
When pilots ditch, they want their airplane as streamlined as possible so that it glides across the water when it hits. Pilots must not only monitor the systems on the plane, they also have to assess conditions at sea. They don't want to hit a wave head-on.
If you hit perpendicular to the waves or swells with the aircraft, it's like hitting concrete. The plane will break up.
Passengers can see what's coming.
I was hanging on tight to the seat in front of me, and through the window, I could see the impact was imminent.
The crew is 700 feet above the sea.
You're with me, Ellie, huh? Careful. Shokri, ready?
Ready.
Here we go. There is no other God but Allah. Muhammad is his messenger. In the name of God, merciful, merciful.
At a speed of 145 miles an hour, the plane collides with the sea.
I lost consciousness. I woke up in the water. I was 2 or 3 meters underwater. I came up to the surface wearing only my pants. I had lost my life jacket and clothes on impact. I got to the surface and grabbed onto a bag. I was in shock. I was surrounded by everything. My thoughts were constantly with Paola. I thought I was going to die because I was spitting blood. I felt my lungs filling with blood.
Captain Garbi survives, but has been seriously injured. Co-pilot Ali Kabair has also survived, but flight engineer Shokri Haboui is killed. No one aboard the nearby boat saw Flight 1153 crash into the sea. The plane has broken into 3 pieces. The tail section and much of the fuselage sink to the bottom of the sea. But the largest section, containing the 2 wings, stays afloat. It becomes a makeshift life raft for survivors. But not all of the passengers have survived. Many haven't made it out of the plane and to the surface. A fleet of rescue personnel are en route, including Admiral Vincenzo Pace of the Italian Coast Guard. Rescuers must travel 26 miles through heavy seas to get to the crash site.
The sky was very visible, but the water was agitated. This caused some problems to the recovery mission.
Helicopter pilot Stefano Borrigana is one of the first to arrive at the scene.
The approach control asked us if we were aware of ditched aircraft out of the coast of Palermo, and if we were able to help them to locate the airplane. When we approached the airplane, we could see the wings floating. There were several people in the water around the aircraft, all floating, and everybody with their jacket inflated.
Borrigana spots Luca Squicciarini floating, away from the main wreckage.
There was one man without his jacket, and he was the farthest from the airplane. I decided to go over him and throw one of our life jackets to him.
The Coast Guard arrives and begins pulling survivors from the sea.
The actions of the people in the water made us very agile. Because of what they were doing, we ourselves did not panic. We had the calm collaboration of all these people because despite what happened, they knew help was coming and they would be rescued.
Within the hour, the crash site is teeming with rescuers. They search for survivors from the water and from the air. "23 people are pulled from the Mediterranean Sea. But 16 have died in the crash, including Paola Di Ciaula.
My relatives told me a couple days later, while I was still at the hospital. I had no reaction. Paola was gone. I reacted when I got home. When I got home and went to the cemetery, I realized what was happening. That's where I got really down.
Barbara Baldacci and her fiancé Francesco are also killed.
Sembrava impossibile che potesse essere successa una tragedia.
It seemed impossible that this terrible tragedy would happen, because Barbara and Francesco were great swimmers.
Erano nuotatori, avevano il brevetto di nuotatori.
They used to go underwater without any problems. How is it possible that many on that plane saved themselves and they didn't? I was stunned and incredulous.
Io rimasi incredula ed impietrita.
It's quite likely that none of those who died ever had a chance to swim to safety. Their serious injuries would have prevented them from escaping after the plane hit the water. In this accident, most of the survivors were seated in the rear of the plane. Most of those who died up front. Those sections, along with some valuable clues, are now at the bottom of the sea. The one section that didn't sink is towed to the port in Palermo and taken to a nearby hangar. A team of agents from Italy's National Flight Safety Agency, the ANSV, begin looking for leads. Their job, find out why Flight 1153's engines stopped in mid-flight.
We need to collect as much as evidence as possible in order to fulfill two main answers. What happened and why had it happened?
They are led by Chief ANSV investigator Vincenzo Panetta
I arrived in Palermo the day after the accident, on the 7th, very early in the morning.
Per piacere, permesso.
A flight test engineer by training, Panetta has led several air crash investigations. The engines and central fuselage of Tuninter Flight 1153 have been recovered. The rest of the plane lies somewhere off the Sicilian coast.
The main challenge of the investigation was the fact that the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder and also the front fuselage were 1,500 meters under the sea.
While the Italian Navy conducts a deep-water search for the rest of the wreck and the crucial black boxes, Italian investigators are given some assistance by the plane's European manufacturer. ATR's Giuseppe Caldarelli is here to find out if there's a flaw with the company's plane.
Anytime there is an accident, and also one people die, for me, is a big accident.
Worldwide, hundreds of ATR-72s cross the skies each day.
Those aircraft have a very sound structure and robust systems, and are very cost-efficient.
Together, Panetta and Caldarelli set out to find why both engines on such an advanced airplane died in mid-flight.
TUI 1153, we have lost both engines.
Before it happens again.
Captain Garvey, how are you?
I'm getting better, thank you.
Investigators want to know what happened in the cockpit of Tuninter Flight 1153 when the engines died. Without the cockpit voice recorder, they must rely on the recollections of surviving passengers and crew members.
The main cause of double engine failure could be a lack of fuel.
But according to Captain Shafiq Garbi, lack of fuel was not the problem.
What were your fuel readings?
The fuel quantity indicator said 1,800 kilograms of fuel.
What is your fuel load?
Cockpit fuel quantity, 1,800 kilograms.
Fuel supply, check.
Was there any warning that you were low on fuel?
There was definitely no low fuel warning. Just a low feed pressure light.
The absence of a low fuel warning and the presence of a low feed pressure warning is a major clue.
This set of alarms usually indicates that there is a problem in feeding the engine with fuel.
Since the plane's gauges indicated that there was fuel on board that did not get to the engines, ATR's Giuseppe Caldarelli looks for flaws in the fallen plane's fuel delivery system. Four years earlier, an Airbus operated by Air Transat developed a leak in the fuel line that feeds the plane's right engine. Over time, the plane leaked all of its fuel and both engines failed. The pilots were forced to glide their plane to an emergency landing. That incident has a lot of similarities to the Tuninter crash. Giuseppe Caldarelli's team looks for breaks or blockages in the fuel lines and evidence that the fuel pumps malfunctioned and stopped fuel flow to the engines. While Caldarelli waits for technicians to complete tests on pumps and lines, Panetta decides to start a new line of inquiry. He explores the possibility that the fuel that was on board was somehow contaminated.
Fuel contamination can derive from 4 or 5 different sources.
Kerosene-based jet fuel is very delicate. If stored or transferred improperly, it can be polluted with water, sand or fungus, even sticky residue from the hoses of refueling tankers. Any of these could prevent the fuel from properly igniting and could have caused the engines to shut down.
How much fuel are you adding?
400 kilograms.
The plane last took on fuel in Bari. Samples from the tanker that supplied it are taken for testing. Panetta needs to prove that one of these contaminants got into Flight 1153's fuel, prevented combustion, and caused both engines to fail.
Sediments can be transferred from the tanker truck to the aircraft. so the fuel filter can be clogged, and so the engine can have some problem.
Technicians remove the truck's fuel filters to look for evidence of contamination. Hoses and couplings are swabbed for sticky residue or colonies of microorganisms and submitted for testing at an Italian Air Force laboratory. The fuel is filtered for minute particles suspended in the fluid. And carefully examined for impurities. The truck's filters are also inspected for residue or sediment from the tanks. Meanwhile, in Palermo, Caldarelli and his technicians have completed tests on Flight 1153's fuel lines and pumps. The tests are thorough, the results conclusive.
The fuel feed line were okay, were no leak.
If the fuel delivery system was working, and the two pilots remember having ample fuel,
the fuel quantity indicator said 1,800 kilograms of fuel.
Then why had the engines failed? When test results from the Bari fuel tanker come in, they too are conclusive. The fuel filters, hose couplings, and tanker fuel at Bari Airport are clean.
So fuel contamination as a source of double engine flame out was then excluded.
At this point, the investigators still don't know what caused the downing of Tuninter Flight 1153. But something has been eating at Panetta. If the plane was filled with fuel, and since the fuel is stored in the plane's wings, why did the wing section float?
Floating on the wing indicates that the weight of the wing was not so high. We have been told by ATR that if the amount of fuel that was supposed to be into the wing, around 2,000 kilograms, were on the fuel tanks, the wings maybe would not be able to float.
Panetta suspects the plane didn't have as much fuel as the pilots thought, but he doesn't know how that could be. 2 weeks into the investigation, Panetta gets an important lead in the case.
After 2 weeks of the event, we received some technical documentation from the aircraft operator.
According to the logs, Captain Garbi flew the same aircraft the day before the accident. After that flight, he reported a problem with his fuel gauge.
When he left the aircraft the day before, he reported that the right display float indicator was out of service, so it needed to be replaced.
The fuel quantity indicator, or FQI, is a gas gauge that tells pilots how much fuel is left on board. The lights on the FQI were malfunctioning, and Captain Garbi made a note of this in the maintenance log.
We were able to see that the fuel quantity indicator was changed the day before the event.
The maintenance log raises the possibility that the FQI that the mechanic installed was not the right one for the plane. It doesn't seem to have the right model number. Tuninter flies two models of ATR aircraft, the ATR-42 and the larger ATR-72. The fuel quantity indicators for each plane look identical, except for a different model number at the top of each unit. The ATR-72 should have a model number 2500. But according to the logs, mechanics installed a unit with the model number 2250 instead. Tuninter's maintenance logs offer a valuable clue. But for Panetta, there's no definitive proof that the wrong fuel quantity indicator was installed on the plane.
It could have been a mismatch in that aircraft documentation, so we need to prove that.
There is only one way to know for certain whether Flight 1153 had the right fuel quantity indicator. Go find it at the bottom of the sea.
We need, of course, to recover the wreckage from bottom aircraft to physically see what was the fuel quantity indicator installed on the aircraft.
Not until 3 weeks after the crash do investigators recover wreckage from the sea. The data from the plane's black boxes confirms what the pilots have been saying. There was no warning of low fuel, so there appeared to be enough fuel to make the flight. The black boxes can't solve this mystery. Investigators hope that the tail and front section can. They are hauled aboard a naval vessel from the sea. The moment the cockpit is hauled in, Panetta is there. There's only one thing he wants to see inside.
So when the wreckage was recovered from under the sea and put on the ship deck, I realized that, as a matter of fact, the fuel quantity indicator for an ATR-42 was installed. It was like we found the smoking gun.
The wrong FQI was installed on Flight 1153. Panetta finally has the break he's been looking for. The ATR's fuel quantity indicator collects data from sensors in the fuel tanks and calculates how much fuel is in the tanks. But since the fuel tanks on the 42 and the 72 are a different size, fuel quantity indicators can't be swapped between them. Technicians conduct refueling tests with the wrong FQI installed on an ATR-72. And the results are chilling.
The results show that if you install an FQI type, we'll say 42, on an ATR-72 aircraft, if I have no fuel into the aircraft in the fuel tanks, with zero fuel, the fuel quantity indicator show me 1,800 kilograms.
Precisely the amount of fuel that the captain reported having when his engines flamed out.
Cockpit fuel quantity 1,800 kilograms.
Investigators conclude, at 23,000 feet above the Mediterranean, the wrong fuel indicator led the crew to believe that they had ample fuel, when their tanks were actually empty.
Engine relight. Negative. They're not doing anything.
The engines could not possibly have been restarted. With hundreds of ATR-42s and ATR-72s still flying, the implications are stark. Could there be other planes flying with the wrong gauge?
The first safety recommendation was to mandate all operators that use ATR-42 and 72 aircraft in their fleet to check whether the right fuel quantity indicator was installed on the aircraft.
Panetta and Caldarelli have uncovered the error that caused both of Flight 1153's engines to quit in mid-air. But the case isn't closed. Standard flight procedures should have uncovered the error before takeoff and prevented the disaster. Captain Garbi's aircraft went in for repairs in Tunisia the night before the crash. The plane's FQI indicated 790 kilograms of fuel in the tank. After the new fuel quantity indicator was installed, it showed that there was almost 4 times as much fuel on board, 3,100 kilograms. The following morning, Captain Garbi noticed that the fuel levels had gone up. He assumed the fuel had been added. But when fuel is added to an aircraft, a refueling slip must be left in the cockpit.
Where is the refueling slip?
The pilot asked to the flight dispatcher where was this refueling slip, but the flight dispatcher was not able to find this refueling slip.
I'll get it to you when you get back from Jerba.
Roger that.
There was no refueling slip because the plane hadn't been refueled. In spite of regulations, the captain left without that vital piece of paper.
There are some standard regulations requiring the pilot to take off only when he is sure about the quantity of fuel.
With the wrong fuel indicator on board and less fuel than he believed, Captain Garbi makes it to Bari, Italy, and tops up his plane for the next leg of the trip to Jerba.
How much fuel are you adding?
400 kilograms.
2,700 total?
Believing he has 2,700 kilograms of fuel on board, Captain Garbi begins his flight to Jerba. If the correct fuel quantity indicator had been installed, the captain would have known that he had only 540 kilograms. Not nearly enough to make the crossing.
Mayday! 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 TUI 1153 request immediate landing at Palermo. We've lost both engines.
Panetta's investigation comes to a close. He draws up his final report. His colleague, Giuseppe Caldarelli, voices a bold view. Even with no fuel and dead engines, Flight 1153 could have made it to land.
The aircraft was in a position that allowed to reach Palermo.
TUI 1153.
Caldarelli wonders if the pilots did everything they could have to get the plane safely to Palermo.
TUI 1153.
Investigators get some unexpected answers by having seasoned pilots fly the exact same flight with the exact same problems.
Okay, we are now in big trouble because the second engine has gone off,
Vincenzo Panetta's investigation into the crash of Tuninter Flight 1153 has uncovered the events that led up to the accident. Now he and Giuseppe Caldarelli need to resolve one question. Did mistakes made by the pilots cost people their lives?
We're not gonna make it. Prepare to ditch.
Caldarelli and his team study the plane's specifications and draw a surprising conclusion. Flight 1153 could have been able to glide to Palermo. According to manufacturer data, an ATR is able to glide 3 miles for every 1,000 feet of descent. With the help of the tailwind that day, Flight 1153 could have been able to glide 70 miles to Palermo. The crew might have been able to make it.
Landing gear lever up.
So what had the pilots done wrong? To answer that question, Panetta and Caldarelli recreate Flight 1153 in the flight simulator at the ATR facility in France. Test pilots try to glide an ATR-72 for 70 miles from the altitude at which Flight 1153 lost its second engine.
The simulation was requested to see the range of the aircraft starting from the second engine out.
Double engine flame out, you have to be very aware of the configuration of the aircraft in order to keep as much as possible the altitude and distance to fly before the crash.
Stop! Stop. Engine number 1 is flamed out.
With both engines out, the priority is to keep the plane gliding as far as necessary. To do that, pilots can change the angle of their windmilling propellers.
You have the maximum glide performance when you minimize the drag. It's very important to think to feather the propeller in order to reduce the drag.
Feathering the props involves changing their angle against the wind. The maneuver reduces drag.
When you want to feather the propeller in flight, you first have to reduce the power lever to idle and put the condition lever back to feather position.
The crew did not feather their props when their engines quit. The windmilling propellers created enormous drag. If the crew of Flight 1153 had feathered their props, they may have been able to glide further than they did.
Let's get to 17,000 feet.
By the time Captain Garby's second engine flamed out, he was just below 22,000 feet. To further reduce drag at that altitude, the plane should be slowed to 158 miles per hour, the ATR-72's ideal gliding speed. Surprisingly, to glide as far as possible, a pilot doesn't want to fly as fast as possible. The faster a plane flies, the more the airflow pushes against it, creating resistance. Every plane has an optimal speed to achieve the furthest glide. The crew continued flying up to 55 miles an hour faster than their optimal gliding speed. That added to the drag on the plane and reduced the distance they could glide. By feathering his props and reducing his speed, a simulator pilot in France was able to get the plane as far as Palermo.
You're with me, Ellie, huh? Careful.
Flight 1153 hit the water 26 miles from shore, well short of what the plane was capable of achieving. The simulation confirmed that the crew might have been able to make it to land.
It was theoretically possible to reach the coast, but it was also very difficult to achieve that result.
Simulator pilots had one big advantage over the crew of Flight 1153. They weren't in a life or death situation, and they knew they had to glide instead.
Fuel supply, check.
But Captain Garby didn't know he was out of fuel. He didn't think he'd need to glide to Palermo. Garby focused on restarting the engines instead. Feathering the props isn't part of that procedure. If the captain had known he was out of fuel, he might have acted to maximize glide instead. Once he realized that his engines wouldn't start, his focus was on trying to find a place to ditch the plane. Captain Garby also had to contend with a lack of instruments, as well as radio interruptions.
TUI 1153.
What is your fuel load?
Cockpit fuel quantity, 1,800 kilograms.
Most importantly, Captain Garby had the lives of his 34 passengers to consider.
Of course, it's much easier to cope with that kind of situation on the simulator, because if you do wrong, if you crash the aircraft, you have the magic button, right, reset, everything is okay again. And that's very different in the real life with passengers behind and when it's your life.
Your distance
is now 20 miles.
We're not going to make it.
The simulation highlights the importance of proper training to deal with unlikely situations, such as a twin-engine flameout.
In aviation, it's a very rare event.
Vincenzo Panetta's report urges airlines to train their pilots how to ditch without engine power. Better pilot training is just one of 17 safety recommendations in the accident report. Perhaps the most important, that ATR redesigned the fuel quantity indicator.
In order to prevent a fuel quantity indicator type 42 on a 72 aircraft and vice versa.
To prevent mechanics from installing the incorrect part, Panetta believes that the only answer is to design the FQIs so that they only fit on the plane they're meant for. 9 men face charges of criminal negligence for the downing of Flight 1153, including the Tuninter mechanic who installed the wrong FQI and Captain Garby.
I'll get it to you when you get back from Jerba.
Roger that.
There is no single cause of the accident. This accident, like many other aircraft accidents, was determined by a series of actions, a series of events linked one to each other.
È inaudita una cosa del genere.
This is unheard of.
Avrei accettato di più se si fosse adotto un motore.
I would have accepted the engine breaking or a window shattering. But to have people die because of a lack of fuel?
Perché manca di carburante su un aereo.
Per evitare che si possano ripetere altre tragedie.
We remember this to avoid such other tragedies. so that when you board a plane, you don't have to endure anything, not even the simplest things.
Semplici, perché sono quelle cose più semplici che si potrebbero evitare.
Because it is the simple things that can be avoided. Tragic events like this should not happen.
Dei disastri così gravi.
Attempt to restart the engine.
The crash of Flight 1153 was caused by a series of grave errors on the ground and in the air. But the flight data recorder does show that the crew's last move before hitting the water was absolutely perfect.
Here we go.
According to the available evidences, the flight data recorder and also some statement released by the crew that survived, the aircraft touched the sea first with the rear part of the aircraft at an altitude which is compatible with the optimum pitch altitude of the aircraft, which is 9 degrees.
Captain Garbi raised the plane's nose up to 9 degrees at the last possible moment. So instead of plowing into the sea, his plane glided along the surface of the water. The maneuver likely saved lives by allowing more passengers to escape the ruined aircraft. His flying may have prevented this accident from becoming an even greater tragedy. Zurich Airport, November 2001. Crossair Flight 3597 is one of the few planes left to land.
The commander was flying out of Zurich for the last 20 years, so he was really used to this airport.
Crossair 359.
The lone controller in the tower tracks the approach.
Approach runway 28 for you.
I have ground contact. We're continuing on.
Crossair 3597, continue speed reduction to final approach speed.
But for some reason, the crew can't find the runway.
Damn. He said he saw the runway 1.3 miles.
And the flight ends in disaster.
Crossair 3597, this is Zurich Tower. Do you copy? We have a possible emergency and approach.
He collided with a hill, so obviously he was too low.
A terrible mistake sent a passenger jet dangerously off course, killing 24 people. The clues will lead investigators to a trained professional with an astonishing past.
Mayday, Mayday.
Crossair Flight 3597 is cruising at 27,000 feet above Germany. As the autopilot flies the plane, the crew begins reviewing procedures for their landing.
According to the report, the apron and taxiways are wet. Braking action's not specified.
So the friction report is missing?
Indeed.
That usually means they haven't been out to check lately.
Indeed.
It's the last flight of the day on this busy European route. The 660-kilometer journey from Berlin south to Zurich takes only an hour and a half. There are many empty seats on board. A group of 21 passengers never showed up for the flight. Internet entrepreneur Peter Hogenkamp is returning from a business trip in Germany with his partner, Jacqueline Badran.
On that day, we wanted to take the train, but we had to be in Zurich for that opening ceremony of that trade show, so we said, okay, so we need to go by plane.
We've got to get some sleep.
It had been a very busy day, so we were very tired when we arrived at the airport.
Among the passengers is the girl band Passion Fruit, Germany's answer to the Spice Girls. They're on their way to perform the last show of a concert tour.
I was shocked when suddenly all the passion fruits, all the three of them, were coming over, and they were sitting right in front of us.
Just what I needed.
Flight 3597 is an Avro 146 airliner. It's a British-made jet popular with regional airlines like Crossair. Captain Hans-Ulrich Lutz is in command. He's been with the airline for more than 22 years, having served as a pilot and as an instructor.
So, tell me about the runway and the conditions.
Overcast with light snowfall. Visibility 3.
First Officer Stefan Lehrer is a newcomer to the airline. He's had his pilot's license for just a year and a half. He was hired by Crossair right out of flight school.
The passion fruits were being quite noisy. They were excited. I think they went from one gig to the other. So they were still in their stage clothes. I said, oh my God, do I really need this? Can I just sleep?
It's probably okay to move.
We decided to move back a few rows and change the side where we were sitting, so we were in a very quiet area then.
Crossair 3597, clear to flight level 160.
The flight is slightly behind schedule. It's due to land in Zurich in less than half an hour.
According to the latest information, we'll be using runway 14.
What kind of approach?
ILS approach.
Okay.
An ILS, or Instrument Landing System approach, means the pilots will be guided to the runway by radio signals beamed from the airport.
And a decision altitude of 1,602 feet. Call me 100 above minimums.
Okay, I'll call 100 above minimums.
The plane's sophisticated computers will do most of the work getting them down. At Zurich Airport, the weather is getting worse. It's snowing, and visibility is dropping.
Crossair 3191, turn left, heading 150.
In the tower, controllers have started a nightly routine. A supervisor sends out a message notifying crews that runway 14 is being taken out of service because of a controversial new law. Planes landing on runway 14 must fly over Germany on their approach. But people in Germany have long complained about the noise.
Because of the political issue, airplanes had to fly over Switzerland in their final descent to the airport of Zurich for noise reasons. There was no other operational or weather reasons whatsoever. It was purely political.
Switzerland has agreed to shut down runway 14 after 10 p.m. to keep landing planes out of German airspace and use runway 28 instead. The crew hasn't received this information yet. But First Officer Lehrer is familiar with the new rule.
Should I ask if it's still runway 14? It's almost 10 o'clock.
Yes, I'm pretty sure it's still 14.
Zurich approach, Crossair 3597. Please confirm the approach in use is the ILS 14.
Crossair 3597, you're identified. It will be a VOR DME. Approach runway 28 for you.
Oh, hell. What next? Okay, fine.
Unlike runway 14 with its sophisticated instrument landing system, runway 28 is not equipped for ILS landings. Instead, it has a less accurate navigational system. It's called VOR DME. A radio beacon sends information to an aircraft about its distance from the runway and whether it's left or right of it. It provides no guidance on the plane's altitude. Pilots would rather not make VOR approaches because they place a greater workload on the flight crew.
he would always prefer an ILS approach because he gets guidance on the approach slope. And he can also use his autopilot to guide him down literally on ground to the runway.
Because of its less precise technology, runway 28 was rarely used for landings before the new noise law.
Okay then, rebriefing for runway 28. That would be chart 13-2.
Now Captain Lutz abandons the ILS approach he was planning and prepares his first officer for the new non-precision approach.
Are you familiar with the 28 approach?
Yes, I've done it a couple of times.
The crew goes over every detail of how they will approach Zurich Airport.
Krassendingen, Zurich. East 6,000 feet.
There are only a few planes left to land tonight,
3597.
including Flight 3597 and 2 other Crossair flights just ahead of it. As the aircraft approach the runway, controllers need to keep them apart.
Crossair 3597, reduce speed to 180 or less.
Speed 180 or less, Crossair 3597.
Captain Lutz makes the final turn to line his jet up with the runway.
160 knots.
The plane is now in the thick of the heavy weather surrounding Zurich. At the airport, the second last Crossair flight touches down on runway 28. Now, with only Flight 3597 to land, the supervisor decides to head home early. The controller handling the aircraft is the only controller left in the tower.
Crossair 3597, continue speed reduction to final approach speed.
Zurich Tower, this is Crossair 3891.
She gets a report from the plane that just landed.
Visibility approaching 28 was borderline. We could only see the runway from 1.3 miles out.
But Captain Lutz knows Zurich Airport well. He continues towards the runway.
Gear down.
The plane begins the final stage of its approach.
Cabin crew, prepare for landing.
Captain Lutz begins slowing the jet and puts it into a steep descent.
Six miles is checked.
Yes.
Flaps 3-3.
Flaps 3-3 selected.
Final check.
Final check. Confirm 3 greens.
Is checked. 116 knots.
The descent gets even steeper.
Full flaps. Set.
Checked.
Flight 3597 is about 3 minutes from the runway. Captain Lutz expects it to come into view any second now.
100 above.
Do we have ground contact?
Yes.
Passengers prepare themselves for landing.
We were pretty close to the airport, so you think, okay, this is going smoothly, but it was dark and it was snowing, so we couldn't see anything.
In the tower, the controller monitors the flight to make sure it's lined up with the runway.
Crossair 3597, cleared to land runway 28.
The minimum.
2-4.
The flight has hit decision height, 2,400 feet above sea level, 1,000 feet above the ground near Zurich.
Decision height is the minimum height you can descend before. You need to decide whether you can see the runway and continue the approach visually, or you have to make a decision to go around.
I have ground contact. We're continuing on.
Captain Lutz still can't see the runway lights, but knows that the flight ahead of him had the same problem.
He said he saw the runway 1.3 miles.
They should almost be on top of the runway by now. But for some reason, they still can't see it.
Make it go around.
Crossair 3597.
The crew decides to abort the landing.
Go around!
Go around!
And pushes the plane to its limits in an effort to get it to climb. Captain Lutz throttles up his plane's 4 jet engines as he aborts his landing at Zurich Airport. But it's too late. There's not enough time for the engines to get to full power and clear a tree-covered hill suddenly looming dead ahead. Residents of a nearby village witness Flight 3597's final moments.
I was walking down with my dog. All of a sudden I saw that aircraft coming from behind the forest, the little hill. And I thought, oh, it's very low and it's not on the same route as aircrafts normally are coming to land at the airport of Zurich.
The jet clips the treetops.
Suddenly, it was shaking very hard. What's happening? Something is wrong.
Moments later, the aircraft plunges into the hillside.
Crossair 3597, this is Zurich Tower. Do you copy? Crossair 3597, this is Zurich Tower. Do you copy?
All of a sudden, the whole sky in the west was getting really orange, like a big fire, like an explosion.
The impact tears the aircraft apart.
The wings broke off and the fuel is in the wings, so the flames really sort of shot inside the plane.
Crossair 3597, this is Zurich Tower. Do you copy? This is Zurich Tower. We have a possible emergency in approach sector east. I repeat, approach sector east.
Crossair Flight 3597 has crashed near the village of Bassersdorf, northeast of Zurich. Some people have survived the accident, including Peter Hogenkamp and Jacqueline Badran.
I don't have any memory of how we really walked out, because the back was cut off and we were just able to walk out there.
One member of Passion Fruit also survives, but her 2 bandmates seated just 1 row ahead of her have been killed.
I thought, you know, when they give you these instructions in the beginning when you get on the plane, how come they never tell you how far you have to run away from a burning plane? Because they never tell you.
Let's get away from here.
So we thought, I don't know, 100 meters.
Within minutes, emergency workers get to the crash site.
Hey! Over here! Over here!
24 of the 33 people on board Flight 3597 are dead, including Captain Lutz and First Officer Stefan Lehrer. Daniel Connect, an investigator from Switzerland's Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau, arrives at the scene.
I got the call from our rescue service about 10:30 in the evening. Half an hour later, I was on the accident site. The rear part of the fuselage was quite intact. It was also the region where most of the survivors step out without injury.
For Peter Hogenkamp and his partner, it appears that moving to the rear of the plane saved their lives.
I think it was just good luck. I think it would have been a whole different story if we wouldn't have changed seats. So the passion fruits may have saved their lives.
While rescuers care for the survivors, Connect and his team survey the crash site. The location of the wreckage far from the airport is of interest to the investigators.
4 kilometers and 50 meters from the runway.
The aircraft was not where he was intended to be. He collided with a hill east of runway 28, so obviously he was too low. And the first question was, why was this aircraft too low?
The black box flight recorders are found in the wreckage. They're in good condition. Investigators are well aware that this is the worst aviation disaster on Swiss territory in over a decade. They're under pressure to find answers fast. While work continues at the crash, a command post is established nearby. Jean Auvernet heads the Swiss Investigation Bureau. He takes charge of the Crossair file.
The public was very anxious about this crash. The media were raising many questions, so we naturally had to open a more in-depth investigation.
The accident happened at the end of a long day for Captain Lutz. But given his background, investigators must consider other causes.
We knew that the captain was very experienced. He had about 17,000 flight hours during his whole career. Flight instructor, flight examiner, within the company for more than 20 years.
The flight recorders are sent to a lab in Paris to extract their data. At the same time, investigators have begun retrieving fragments of wreckage from the crash site. They look for telltale signs of trouble.
The position of switches is very important. Also, if you have some indication panels, for example, with bulbs in it, you can, after a crash, you can analyze the different wires in the bulbs, and then you can determine which, for example, indications or even warnings were active at the moment of the impact.
An investigator comes across an intriguing piece of wreckage. Oil gauges provide information about the oil flowing to the plane's 4 turbofan engines. Curiously, one of them is installed upside down.
This raised a lot of questions for us and for the media. Everyone wanted to know how you could fly a plane with an instrument installed upside down. It wasn't a very important instrument. You could still read it, even if it was installed upside down.
But if this obvious problem was never fixed, what else could be wrong with the plane?
Obviously, there were maintenance issues here. We looked at how the company was doing the maintenance of the planes.
While this review is being launched, investigators study the plane's engines to determine if they were running at the time of the crash. Soil, tree branches, and other debris lodged inside the engines suggest they were.
We checked them out visually, and we saw that the 4 engines were turning in the moment of the accident.
Authorities need to be sure. They will have to check their findings against data from the flight recorders. In the meantime, the location of the crash suggests something may have tragically misled the crew on their descent towards Zurich airport. Connect focuses on the flight charts they used to plan their approach.
Is the problem with the approach, or is the problem with the aircraft? This kind of question was dominant when we started the investigation.
Are you familiar with the 28 approach?
Yes, I've done it a couple of times.
The approach chart provides pilots with directions to the runway,
Transat Zurich.
details about radio frequencies, as well as altitudes and speed for various stages of the landing. When investigators study an approach chart like the one the crew used, they make a shocking discovery. The chart does not show the hill that the plane hit.
An approach chart is a very important thing because an indication which is not correct on this approach chart could mislead a crew and so easily make them do something wrong.
So, tell me about the runway and the conditions.
Overcast with light snowfall.
A faulty chart would certainly have been a danger to a crew unfamiliar with Zurich airport. But Lutz had flown in and out of Zurich countless times. He and his first officer were both based in the city.
The commander was flying out of Zurich, I think, for the last 15 to 20 years. So he was really used to this airport.
Investigators conclude that the approach chart, while faulty, could have tripped up some crews, but not this one. Some definitive news finally arrives. The engine data from the black box confirms the observations at the crash site.
We could see quite easily that the engines worked absolutely normally.
Another potential cause of the accident is eliminated from the list: mechanical failure. Investigators now consider a different possibility.
I was covering the approach west position on the night of the accident.
Could air traffic control have somehow mishandled the plane? Investigators study records from the night of the accident and make a disconcerting find. Zurich Airport's control tower was understaffed at the time of the accident.
He left before his shift ended.
The supervisor in the tower went home early, leaving a lone controller to guide Flight 3597 in for its landing.
She was relatively young, and let's say she didn't have that much experience.
Investigators now study transcripts of conversations between that air traffic controller and the flight crew, looking for signs she made a mistake.
Crossair 3597, you're identified. Crossair 3597.
Speed 180 or less.
Crossair 28 for you.
Crossair 3597. Zurich approach. Crossair 3597.
Cleared to land.
They find no indication the controller gave the crew faulty instructions. But they do come across the radio call by the pilot of the Crossair flight that landed minutes earlier.
Zurich Tower, this is Crossair 3891. Visibility approaching 28 was borderline. We could only see the runway from 1.3 miles out.
That pilot warned of poor conditions on the approach to runway 28.
She had options.
They wonder why the controller didn't shut the runway down. Because of poor visibility, she could have reopened runway 14 in spite of the noise bylaw. This would have allowed the crews to make an instrument approach. But she didn't do that.
Thank you, Crossair 3891. Have a good evening.
It would have been much easier to fly Alice approaches in this kind of weather, regardless of this political issue.
It's suspected that without her supervisor present, the controller lacked the experience to make such an important call.
So it's clear that to make the decision not to allow an approach on runway 28 and instead make it on runway 14 demanded a certain kind of confidence, a certain kind of courage.
However, Captain Lutz also heard the same warning.
28 was borderline. We could only see the runway from 1.3 miles out.
Gear down.
He kept going in spite of it. Investigators are now certain that the controller was in no way responsible.
A pilot can always say no. He can always reject the clearance. If he thinks that landing is probably not possible, he is free to reject an approach clearance and ask for a different one.
Jean Auvernet can't understand why Captain Lutz didn't do exactly that. He should have known that he didn't have to make a non-precision approach in bad weather.
When we saw the mistake the pilot had made, we immediately asked ourselves, well, how's it possible? Because for an experienced pilot who was an instructor, this was a really basic mistake.
Auvernet is beginning to wonder if something in Lutz's long career is hiding clues about his behavior on the night of the accident. One by one, investigators are ruling out the possible causes of the crash of Crossair Flight 3597. They hope the answer lies in the cockpit voice recorder, or CVR, of the doomed jet. After waiting many days for its data to be sent back from France, they now pore over it carefully, listening for any clues that might explain why the plane was flying so close to the ground, so far from the airport.
ILNAV is engaged.
Authorities get more than they expected. Not only is the CVR complete, but Captain Lutz offers a running commentary on everything he does.
And on inbound track 275. Speed is checked, flaps 18.
It's practically a roadmap to understanding what went on in the cockpit.
Flaps 33.
That's not usual that the pilot flying is talking so much about what he is doing or what he is seeing. And for the investigation, this helped a lot.
100 above.
Do we have ground contact?
Yes.
Investigators learned that the crew of Flight 3597 was looking for the runway and believed it would soon come into view.
From the CVR, we saw that the commander and also his co-pilot were not feeling some fear or feeling that something was not going as they planned.
But what they didn't know was that the plane was actually 4 miles shy of its target.
Damn. He said he saw the runway 1.3 miles.
300.
Captain Lutz obviously thought his jet was closer to the runway than it was. Investigators consider the possibility he was misled by his distance measuring equipment, or DME. It's supposed to tell pilots how far they are from the airport.
The DME indication would have given this distance, and then he would have detected immediately that he was below the approach pass.
Perhaps the DME from Flight 3597 was faulty. It's been recovered from the wreckage, but it's impossible to tell what information it gave the pilots. However, there is another way to check whether the instrument was functioning or not.
The DME distance is not recorded on the FDR, but on 2 occasions the pilots mentioned the distance.
6 miles is checked.
Yes.
But was Captain Lutz really 6 miles out from the runway when he made that report? Investigators compare the time Lutz checked his DME with radar data on the aircraft's location at that exact same time. They can see that when Lutz's instruments were telling him he was 6 miles out, that's precisely where he was.
So we knew that the pilots had an indication for the distance available at that time.
An instrument problem can now be crossed off the list as a factor in the crash, which only heightens the mystery.
I have ground contact. We're continuing on.
If the instrument was working, why did Lutz think he was closer to the runway than he actually was? The answer lies not in what investigators hear on the cockpit voice recorder, but what they don't hear.
I don't see anything after 6 miles.
Do we have ground contact?
Neither pilot read out a DME check after the 6-mile reading.
Yes.
It tells investigators that Lutz wasn't monitoring his vital instrument during the final minutes of his approach. Instead, he was preoccupied with spotting the lights of the runway. That's not what pilots are supposed to do.
The pilot flying is supposed to keep his eyes on the instruments because all the information he needs is there. He only switches to flying by sight when the non-flying pilot says, "Runway in sight." Only then can the captain take his eyes off the instruments and fly by sight because the landing is performed visually.
À vue. Parce que l'atterrissage en tant que tel se fait à vue.
If Lutz had checked his instruments, he would have known how far from the runway he actually was. But how had he ended up such a long distance from it?
400.
Confirm 3 greens.
400.
Is checked. 116 knots.
Further analysis of the black box data reveals that Lutz put his plane into a steep descent as it began its final approach to Zurich airport. But it's readily apparent his approach profile was out of sync with the trajectory laid out in his chart. The approach profile for runway 28 calls for pilots to make a gradual and steady descent, which would bring them to 2,400 feet after they've cleared the hills around Zurich. Then pilots have to level off until they spot the runway. When investigators compare the approach Lutz made with the approach profile he was supposed to follow, they find that his overly steep descent brought him to 2,400 feet well before he cleared the hills. Then he continued to descend until he hit the ground. It's beginning to look like Lutz had violated one of the cardinal rules of flying. Aircraft making non-precision approaches are supposed to level off at minimum descent altitude or safe height until they have the runway in view. This safe height is intended to keep the aircraft above any potential hazards.
It's really a basic error. Every pilot is trained to respect such minimums. Not only with VOR DME approaches, but also with ILS approaches.
But Captain Lutz kept his aircraft in a steep descent without even pausing at 2,400 feet. The logical next question for investigators, could he see the runway or not?
I have ground contact. We're continuing on.
What does he mean by ground contact?
They need to know if it was even possible for Lutz to see the runway when he reported ground contact. They retrace his steps in a simulator, programmed with the weather he was facing that night.
6 miles from runway, altitude 3,300 feet. 4.8 miles, 2,400 feet. Still no runway in sight.
Non, il ne pouvait pas.
No, he couldn't see the runway because there was a hill between him and the runway, and at that altitude, there's no way he could see it.
À l'altitude de laquelle il était voir la piste.
The conclusion, Captain Lutz had clearly violated his minimum descent altitude.
Whether there is flat terrain or hills, minimums are set accordingly, and in no way you can just bust the minimums, whether there's hills or not.
This discovery raises questions not just about Lutz's actions, but his young first officers as well.
2-4, the minimum.
2-4.
We're continuing on.
A first officer should not let his captain breach minimum descent altitudes.
Il aurait pu intervenir.
The co-pilot could have said, no, stop, we can't see the runway, we're not descending.
On voit pas la piste, on descend pas.
He considered his captain an old pilot with a lot of experience, not making any mistakes. Most probably he was trusting him too much. And also by being submissive, maybe he wouldn't speak up on time, just to keep harmony in the cockpit.
There were no mechanical failures or instrument problems with the plane. Nor was the air traffic controller negligent in any way. But it is now clear that Captain Lutz made a series of catastrophic piloting errors that doomed Flight 3597 and claimed the lives of 24 people. Investigators dig deeper into Captain Hans-Ulrich Lutz's flying record to see if there's anything in his long background that could explain why he crashed Flight 3597. What they discover is truly alarming. Lutz applied to flight school when he was 17 years old. He was rejected 3 times because of his lack of education. He finally got his license at the age of 20, but continually failed exams to upgrade due to his inadequate comprehension of navigation systems. Captain Lutz may have had a long career, but it was not a stellar one.
Years of flying and flying hours don't say anything about competence.
For some reason, though, his record as a below-average pilot didn't prevent Crossair from hiring him in 1979.
There was a red line through his career where several incidents happened before and he had missed several checks. Well, he had some limits, but what's hard to understand for me is that they were identified and decision was made to keep him flying.
Captain Lutz's limited abilities continued in his new job. While commanding a sightseeing tour of the Swiss Alps, he made a navigation error and ended up in Italy. He only realized his mistake when his passengers spotted road signs in Italian. In another incident, he wrecked a $1.5 million aircraft after inadvertently retracting the landing gear while the plane was still on the tarmac. Lutz's failures forced Crossair to fire him as an instructor, but they allowed him to continue flying passenger planes.
I personally do pilot assessments, and he would never have gone through my assessment with a positive recommendation.
Okay, approach course 13.
Investigators wonder why Crossair allowed Lutz to stay on as a pilot if he was not entirely competent. The answer appears to be they may have had little choice. Investigators' first glimpse into the problems at Crossair came after they found the upside-down gauge at the crash site.
We had to check if the employees had received the proper training, if they had the qualifications required for this kind of work. No glaring maintenance issues were found, but a closer look at Crossair's hiring practices explains why Captain Lutz was allowed to keep flying. The airline may have grown too fast throughout the 80s and 90s.
La compagnie, elle s'est agrandie très rapidement.
The company expanded very rapidly, and with that success, it's clear that you have to quickly increase the staff. Office workers, mechanics, that's one thing, but pilots, you have to go out and find them.
Mais les pilotes, tu devais les trouver.
In those days, they were desperate for pilots, and somehow no decision was made to lay him off because of his questionable performance during his career.
Captain Lutz's failings caught up with him on November the 24th, 2001.
Make him go around. Go around!
24 people paid with their lives. After the accident report was issued, sweeping changes were made. Swiss aviation authorities had Crossair increase the number of employees overseeing pilots. They also scrutinized other airlines to determine if there were other substandard performers like Lutz.
One thing is for sure that the selection process has improved considerably. And of course, awareness of people's performance during their career was increased considerably.
Crossair went out of existence in 2002. It was folded into the Swiss national carrier.
As Crossair became Swiss, they adopted the previous Swissair selection process. And I can say today, which is already 9 years since, that safety has improved considerably, and also quality of the pilots that are hired by companies like Swiss.
Since the crash of Flight 3597, Zurich's runway 28 has been upgraded with both an instrument landing system and an automatic warning that alerts controllers when a plane's approach is too low. There has never been another accident involving that runway. But the Crossair tragedy and the circumstances that spawned it isn't an isolated case. Regional airlines have boomed worldwide since the 1980s, particularly in the United States, where they account for half of all flights and carry 100 million passengers a year. In the rush to fulfill consumer demand for cheap air travel, these airlines often hire less experienced pilots and pay them far lower salaries than their counterparts at major carriers. Some even neglect to test their pilots for basic skills.
There is no such thing as a compulsory pilot assessment before they get hired. Does not exist.
Colgan Air, in February of 2009, one of its planes crashed in Buffalo, New York, killing 50 people. The accident was blamed on the actions of an inexperienced crew. An eerie reminder of the Crossair disaster, it underlined the urgency of improving oversight of smaller carriers.
If you're making a product for a large company and you make a mistake, you may lose part of the market. You may lose some clients. But an airline company can lose a plane, its crew, and passengers. The stakes are very different.
Naturellement, a des causes un peu différentes.